Why did I choose 2002? Well, it was the year of change. WWE was in an awkward situation where the ratings were starting to fall and wanted to counter by making entirely new stars. And it wasn't helping that The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin disappeared abruptly. The whole entire thing was dire and they had to retaliate fast. Now, will I do more of these? Yes. But don't expect them anytime soon, to be honest. I want to expand and do, like, say, WCW and ECW into the fold. Like, I always wanted to do that as well. I want to call other content creators and ask them if they want to, like, contribute to these year videos. But yeah. Alright, with that said, let's get into it. Let's go back to the era of ruthless aggression. Okay, 2002. If you mention it to many, they'll think of different things. TNA, Ring of Honor, but for me, it's the WWE. The year in itself marks the beginning of a new era aptly entitled Ruthless Aggression. The boss himself, Mr. McMahon, wanted to see real competition from the brands, and it resulted in some great and not so great television. First of all, the most memorable thing, arguably, to have occurred in the year of 2002 was the name change. For some reason, well, many reasons, the WWF violated the terms of their agreement with the other WWF, you know, the Panda. But long story short, World Wrestling Federation took the WWF.com domain. WWF got angry, forcing WWF to change their name after they won in court. And so on May 5th, 2002, World Wrestling Federation became World Wrestling Entertainment. And no, it wasn't like they woke up one morning and thought, oh, we should become WWE like they say in that documentary. But anyways, around the same time period, WWE was undergoing a huge transformation. Since the roster became more bloated than Hulk Hogan's annual salary in WCW, they needed to split the roster into two. After the initial plan, that being WCW on Monday nights, which is insane to think about, and SmackDown, WWF SmackDown on Thursday, didn't come to fruition. And after the invasion, WWE decided to have SmackDown anchored by The Rock and Raw anchored by Stone Cold. They gave both brands something interesting to watch, and they were supposed to be treated as equals. And a draft was even held to decide where the talent was headed. The only people exempt from the draft were the tag team champions and the undisputed champion, and by the end of the year, Raw took the tag titles and SmackDown turned the undisputed championship into a brand exclusive title. The brand split in itself proved to be a massive success for up and coming stars, for mid-card talent that struggled to break through because of an all-time assembly group. In my personal opinion, I feel as if the brand split was a success due to the fact that so many stars were made, and had there never been two brands, I shudder to think what would have happened to the likes of Eddie Guerrero. Like, I don't know if he would have ascended to the top like he did if there wasn't that brand split. Alright, moving on from the topic of the brand split, I'd like to mention something that was probably the biggest blow to the WWE in 2002. That being the departures of Stone Cold and The Rock. In the original plans of the brand split, these two were clearly seen as the ones who would be the faces of their show. By the end of the year, however, neither man was even in the company, and I'd compare it to say if Lionel Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo played on the same team and left within 2 months of each other. Clearly the team would struggle, and yes, I consider them to be the Messi and Ronaldo of WWE due to the fact that they came in at the same time and brought an unmatched level of star power. Austin's departure in particular, if you read back to the beginning of the year, you could see that it was boiling over, but when you look at it from a 2002 perspective, it's kind of unbelievable that the top guy, the biggest star in the company, left. Now, he had his reasons, of course. I mean, Austin was out there, he was having great matches, he was having great stories, and then they suddenly turned him face and just threw him aside for other guys. It just didn't make sense to have the top guy, the most popular guy on the entire roster, relegated to some mid-card feud with the NWO. Add to that, he faced Scott Hall at WrestleMania. Yes, he had his reasons to be angry, and he took his ball and went home. Then that domestic incident with Deborah occurred, and Austin kept a very, very, very low profile heading towards 2003. He eventually returned, but like I said, his departure was a huge blow. With regards to The Rock, this one is clear as day. You know, the guy, he was a rising star in Hollywood. He wasn't prioritizing wrestling over Hollywood, and I think it's a shame because at the time, like when you look at The Rock of 2002, he was a good in-ring performer. Like, I consider Rock of 2002 to be very good and probably at his best. You know, he was having amazing matches left and right, and the only year that I feel rivals it in terms of in-ring quality that The Rock had would be 2000. But yes, he left because of Hollywood, but before leaving, however, he put over a talent, unlike Stone Cold, and went on to film The Rundown. So yeah, Austin and Rock, they left abruptly within 2 months of each other, and it was crazy. But with the departure of both men, it forced WWE to make stars and make them quick. It also leads me to my next topic, faltering ratings. For a multitude of reasons, 2002 marked the year where WWE's ratings fell harder than the Nexus's push in 2010. You can say it was WCW's acquisition and subsequent invasion storyline as the cause. You can say TNN, and a bunch of things can be used for explanation, but WWE failed to fix this. It wasn't until 2005 when John Cena and Batista were established that everything was green, you know, the ratings were slowly rising, and they eventually fell, but at the time there was optimism. With regards to odd storylines that stand the test of time in being insane, HLA deserves a mention. For a company that was looking to change its identity, WWE certainly failed to do that. In this case, the lesbian storyline seemed much more suited for 1998 rather than 2002, and it was a desperate act of drawing ratings, and that in itself caused great embarrassment for the company. TNN issued a very apologetic statement in light of what had occurred on Raw, and the amount of things people would do to draw ratings. Like, man. At the same time, WWE is going to have both Billy and Chuck get married in the middle of the ring. Glad was very supportive of this, and it turned out that both Billy and Chuck weren't gay. Glad got angry with WWE, and at the time they were heavily criticized for what they were booking on television. WWE was really wilding in September of 2002. Like, were they that desperate to draw ratings? I don't know. I just wanted to talk about it quick because this is a 2002 video and it's essential. Speaking of odd, what about Vince Russo? The original bro for a very short stint was actually on the creative team, and this was around June of 2002, where WWE was in a huge panic mode. I'll get into that later, but Russo's run in itself didn't last long. Why is that? Well, he wasn't liked backstage. A certain billion-dollar princess disliked Russo and his ideas. Add to that, Bruce Pritchard claims Russo didn't have any idea what was going on because he didn't even watch the shows. Hell, Russo himself confirmed this, and he didn't even know that Triple H and Jericho faced off at WrestleMania 18. The relationship clearly wasn't going to work, and after Vince Russo made his way back home, he received a call from McMahon asking him to be a creative consultant from home. He was offered 6 figures, and even then, Russo claims he declined. With regards to his storyline plans, an Invasion sequel was pitched. Boy Russo had made an enemy out of himself in the past, his departure in '99, and by July of 2002, Vince Russo was gone from WWE. Hell, a few weeks later, he signed with Total Nonstop Action Wrestling. The 2 weeks Vince Russo spent in WWE is considered by many to be a head-scratching decision. It just came so far out of the blue and nothing was accomplished with it because everybody hated him. Moving on from bro getting booted, let's talk about this Raw match. Now, if you're not familiar with this, let me explain. So back in the early 2000s, WWE had a show by the name of Tough Enough. It provided a very real and in-depth look into the struggles of making it to the big leagues. And it's not like you have to go through the indies or anything like that, but for a shortcut to the WWE, it was still hellacious. Jackie Gaeta, a contestant in Season 2, managed to win the entire thing after showing heart and dedication. Despite the injury she sustained, there was nothing stopping her from winning it. And that's all fine, but when it was time for her to debut, it was anything but good. She teamed up with Christopher Nowinski to face Bradshaw and Trish Stratus. Despite the fact that there was some experienced workers in there, the match felt awkward and very botchy. In defense of Jackie, she was thrown to the wolves. On live TV, I should know, this was only after training for about 2 months. Still, many consider this to be the worst match in Raw history from a technical standpoint. I just wanted to mention this because we're talking about the year. Speaking of worst, 2002 was also the year of the plane ride from hell. Talk about a PR nightmare. 2 collegiate athletes fought on the plane, bumped into the door. I don't know if it was going to break or anything like that, but I'm sure some were worried. There was public nudity, men getting intoxicated and embarrassing themselves, Goldust serenading his ex-wife, and the most shocking story of them all, Michael Hayes got his hair chopped off by JBL. This whole plane ride, I can't wait for that documentary on Vice, Dark Side of the Ring to come out. We really need to hear a bunch of the wrestlers' opinions and stories of that night. It's a must. If you want an in-depth look into the plane ride from hell, check out my video or 100 others on YouTube. Another weird thing to have come from 2002 WWE was the Al Wilson saga. This is more hilarious rather than terrible like other things, and let me explain it. So Dawn Marie managed to date Tori's father. They get married and Tori's livid with this because Dawn was giving off a snake vibe or something. It led to some kissing and this ended SmackDown, by the way. Al Wilson ended up dying during the honeymoon because he got too excited, and it's something that if you've never seen before, well, I suggest you do because it sounds just so outlandish writing it. Just writing it for this video, it sounds so weird. And if you thought Al Wilson was bad, well, calling Katie Vick bad would be a sign of praise. This thing in itself was absolute trash TV. So Kane was #1 contender for the world title. Triple H, wanting to get the crowd to hate him, reveals that Kane killed his girlfriend after driving drunk. Triple H then effed a mannequin. They had a casket match, and just thinking if this guy wasn't so green, it wouldn't have happened. It was so bad that Triple H himself despised the whole mannequin thing. Then he considered this to be a horrendous story of epic proportions, and it was necrophilia for the entertainment of one man. From pure trash to pure botching, the WWE's version of NWO. Since WWE was struggling with, you guessed it, ratings, Mr. McMahon decided to finally bring in the New World Order. Kayfabe reasoning was that the WWF needed a lethal injection, a lethal dose of poison, and so basically the boss wanted to kill his own company because Ric Flair was a half owner as well. Okay. Upon the re-debut, they came in and were like every other heels. All that was different was the spray paint. Add to that, they weren't even a real threat like they were in 1996 and 97, and it wasn't helping that The Rock was doing cartwheels around them. Like when you ask me, hey, what do you think of when you hear WWE NWO? I think of The Rock telling Razor Ramon to shove that camera up his ass, the Diesel horn thing.
Big Daddy Cool, Diesel!
It was already ruined, and to make matters worse, Hulk Hogan turned face, and within 30 days of returning to the WWE, he was gone from the group. Big Show, X-Pac joined, and there were previous members, so that wasn't an issue. But then Booker T came in, and to top it all off, Shawn Michaels. Like, that feels illegal to even look at, let alone say. Booker T was buried hard by the team, but hey, at least he's saying, I'm just a Booker T. He stole the show in damn near every segment he's in. Sorry, Shawn. And I'll get into him later. The NWO of WWE was just upper mid-card guys who were too lazy to do anything kayfabe-wise. With HBK taking leadership, it was clearly leading somewhere, possibly a huge storyline with Triple H joining. But Nash tore his quad on July 8th, and McMahon realized, damn, did this suck badly, and ended the NWO on live TV. Like, that's how bad it was. He literally ended the group on television. The WWE's version of NWO was essentially bastardized. But hey, they certainly made cash from the shirts and still do to this day. Moving on, I'd like to mention the discontinuation of multiple titles on Raw. That being the European title, the Hardcore title, and of course the Intercontinental title. In the Euro titles case, it wasn't really that notable for a while. Matter of fact, since D'Lo Brown and Kurt Angle used to fight for it, and with Raw already having 2 other titles, it makes sense to end it or give it to SmackDown. They did the latter, and as for the Hardcore title, that thing was worth about as much as a piece of paper. Everybody and their mom won the title. Shawn Stasiak won the title 15 times, and the mother never held it when the camera's on. So Eric Bischoff had one final hardcore match for the title, that Tommy Dreamer match to win. Because of this, he faced his ECW buddy RVD in a title unification match. Van Dam won, and so the title was deactivated. With regards to the Intercontinental Championship, though, that's odd. Like, this is the most baffling decision WWE made in 2002. It's one of. Like, the title had such a rich and prestige history to it, you know, Mr. Perfect, Randy Savage, Ricky Steamboat, Razor Ramon, Shawn Michaels, all those guys held the title. This rich history that the title has, yet they decide to end the lineage with Triple H. The decision in itself wasn't very good because, for one, it left the mid-carders with nothing to do for about 7 months. It wasn't until then that the WWE realized that Intercontinental title was actually a good thing. I think they wanted to make the world title seem bigger or something, but it left guys like Test and Jeff Hardy lost. Enough title talk, let's give a mention to Matt Cappotelli and Hardcore Holly. Alright, for teaching somebody a lesson, Hardcore Holly sure left a mark. Holly, of course, was this tough old school guy that was going to protect the business at all costs, or he felt like beating up a rookie. Either way, Matt Cappotelli took a beating that he didn't deserve during the Season 3 shooting of Tough Enough. Despite this, he took it like a champ and even shook Holly's hand afterwards. And one thing to note is that Matt did expect to get his ass beat like he did. Holly just brought him into the ring and bullied him straight up. It was a very controversial moment that got Holly some unnecessary heat, and this was after the fact that he broke his neck in a match with Brock Lesnar. To some, it's business, that's how it was, but to others, it paints Hardcore as this huge bully that was a mark for himself. Some even claim that Hardcore was about to get fired due to his actions. And on the topic of Tough Enough, that wasn't even the craziest thing that happened that season. A contestant by the name of Lisa had some sort of psychological breakdown and opted to quit the show, right? Later that night, she was discovered on the roof. I don't know what she was doing there, but they called her parents, which she claimed to have not recognized. If that wasn't bad enough, she escaped custody at LAX and even wanted to go back on the show, but her request was denied. So what did she do? She went down to OVW and claimed that they sent her, and if that wasn't insane enough, she visited a bunch of main roster shows and was even allowed to work with the entrance Pyro. She knew what to say and how to say, and there's also a rumor that she spoke directly to Mr. McMahon, but yeah, she went all out, and I don't know if it's narcissistic tendencies or whatever, but that certainly was a story worth mentioning. Hulk Hogan and The Rock left such a huge mark on March 17, 2002. They absolutely destroyed the house, built it again just to tear it up. The energy from that match rivals just about any in WWE history, but it also drained the crowd and led to Triple H and Y2J battling it out in a very dull match from a reaction standpoint. Other than that, the match was pretty good. You know, Triple H had to overcome the injury, the adversity, his ex-wife in order to hoist those titles. But regardless of the match being good, it remains a largely uneventful main event, and many, including myself, believe Hogan and Rock should have went on last. But hey, Y2J got to main event WrestleMania. Speaking about main event, a certain someone was adulated, loved, adored by the fans, yet never got to ascend above the level that he was at the time. That being Rob Van Dam. If you're looking at it from a future sense, like you're in the year of 2002, you probably thought this guy was going to break through. He had a unique aura and charisma to him, and the fans were magnetically attached. He never got to ascend to the very top and was pigeonholed to the mid-card / upper mid-card scene, but then again, there were some reports at the time stating that the wrestlers disliked Van Dam's style because he'd kicked them in the face for real. And to make matters worse, he crushed the game's larynx in the Elimination Chamber. But still, when you look at it, it's odd that WWE never capitalized on his popularity in some way or shape or form. We all know what he did 4 years later, but when you look at him in 2002, it's a huge missed opportunity. Like, this man, he was absolutely loved by, like, 99% of the crowd. Like, it's very rare to see somebody boo Rob Van Dam. He was that damn likable. One thing that I've realized throughout this Thunderdome era of wrestling is that I don't miss the what chant. My God, were they so annoying. Somebody debuts, tries to cut a promo, and they're swarmed with what chants. It's damn near impossible to overcome them if you're not a notable wrestler. 2001 and 2002, though, proved to be the absolute peak of the what chance, with Austin turning it into a phenomenon. The crowd was absolutely lively during his promos, you know, I'll have 2 beers, what? 3 beers, what? It was ridiculous, and as good as it may have been, the aftermath proved to be hellacious for wrestlers who lacked promo skills. However, I will say that The Undertaker had the best comeback to any what chant of all time. But yeah, the what chant in itself after Austin completely changed wrestling crowds for the bad. Speaking of bad, I can only say 2 words and you'll understand what I'm talking about. Scott freaking Steiner. The big bad booty daddy finally returned to the WWE after 2 years away from pro wrestling. The reception he got from the MSG crowd was ridiculous and showed that there was a great interest in Big Papa Pump, but it was all downhill from there. For one, he debuted as a babyface. Steiner's no BS, explosive, short-tempered character down in WCW was nowhere to be found in WWE, and another unfortunate thing was the fact that Steiner returned while being injured, and not only that, but he wasn't as good as he was in the past. Still though, Steiner's insane charisma and talents outside the ring should have been utilized the best. That in itself was a huge fail, and why bother signing Scott Steiner if they weren't going to have him do well? To me, Scott Steiner really should have been used better than he was. He really could have been a bit more notable than he was in WWE at the time. In September of 2002, the WWE decided to have 2 world titles. The WWE Championship was on SmackDown, and Raw, they got a classic belt renamed to the World Heavyweight Championship. Instead of having a whole tournament for it, Eric Bischoff and kayfabe had such a hard-on for Triple H that he just handed him the title, making him the first ever champion. It's very head-scratching due to the fact that since WWE liked making things a lot interesting back then, a tournament with the likes of Jeff Hardy, Ric Flair, RVD, Booker T, and of course Triple H would have definitely been cool. On the other side of things, does it make sense in storyline? Yes, Eric Bischoff loves Triple H and he'd obviously give him the title. Despite all of that, the title ended up becoming arguably the most important in the company for the next 3 to 4 years, so there's that. Moving on from the world title, I'd like to mention one of the most reviled teams from 2002 WWE. The Un-Americans. Wow, the amount of heat these guys were receiving at the time is something that's damn impossible to get today. They had so much heat that the tag team was scrapped because of fears they had. Now if you know, you know, but in post 9/11 America, there's a lot more patriotism and pride for the country, and having the faction tees burning the flag in New York City didn't seem like the best idea. It still led to Kane returning in superb fashion and destroying the faction to a tremendous crowd reception. But regardless, the guys, they were very scared, they were pissing themselves, and they split about a month later, and with good reason. I mean, if I was them, I would have slept with one eye open. William Regal was the only man not afraid of that heat, and the rest was the 80s. That's the kind of heat they would kill for. The team could have gone on to be a huge heat magnet, but like I said, there were fears within it, and the only guy who wasn't scared was William Regal. They appreciated that kind of heat. You know, this is all I could think of that was either A, negative or just there. Before we move on to the good and very great stuff, I'd like to say what I thought was the worst pay-per-view 2002. That crown goes to King of the Ring. Why? Now, I would give it to Insurrection, but that's just too easy. The reason why I give it to King of the Ring is because the other pay-per-views were so damn good and completely overshadowed the event. Not only that, but other than the opener, there wasn't anything must-watch on the show. It was filled with decent to very disappointing matches, with the worst of them all being the main event. The Undertaker was injured, Triple H was injured as well, and it didn't click at all. The most exciting part was when The Rock randomly ran in and attacked The Undertaker. And that's my pick. That's my pick for the worst pay-per-view of 2002. I want to know what's yours. Worst feud? This is hard to get right. It's Kane vs. Triple H. I don't need to explain this one. You guys know why. Okay, enough of the negative stuff from 2002. Let's finally talk about the good. First up, the debut of Eric Bischoff. To be honest, Eric Bischoff's WWE debut might be the most shocking thing to have occurred in 2002. This is the same man who was bad-mouthing WWF on a weekly basis, spoiled their results, beat them for 83 straight weeks, and it didn't matter who WWF got from WCW, and the signing of Eric Bischoff is more shocking than all. Booker T's reaction was the same as everybody watching the show that night. Unbelievable, and if that wasn't jaw-dropping, the hug that shocked the world certainly was. That moment in itself will forever live in the annals of WWE history as a moment nobody imagined would happen. Bischoff as Raw GM added a whole lot to the show. His cunningness, hatred of babyface men and women, sucking up to Triple H and co made Raw that much more entertaining. Not only that, but Bischoff's decision-making kayfabe-wise led to the creation of the Raw Roulette and the Elimination Chamber. I don't care what anyone says, if Eric Bischoff isn't number one on the greatest GMs list, he's certainly second. His signing also added a lot to the brand warfare storyline that WWE was pushing, as in the early days of the brand split, there was a lot of competition from both Stephanie and Bischoff in trying to sign the best wrestlers and overall putting on the best product. They were both very deceitful in their tactics. Stephanie was promoting SmackDown during Raw, Bischoff was signing talent from under her, and they were really pushing the envelope and trying to make their show the A show, and sometimes it led to bad television, sometimes it led to good stuff. Whenever those two were in the same room, you could feel the tension there, and I always love going back to those Eric Bischoff Raw episodes, as he's one of the guys who contributed positively to the show. He's a great on-screen authority figure. Moving on, let's talk about the new guys on the block. So WWE at this point had their backs against the wall. They had to make a new generation of talent, and quick. They got to do it quickly because Austin and Rock were gone. So they brought in talent that still to this day are making an impact on Monday and Friday nights. The likes of Brock Lesnar was a two-time NCAA Division I All-American. Shelton Benjamin, two-time All-American as well. Randy Orton, second-generation star with loads of potential. John Cena, the prototype who Jim Ross claimed would main event WrestleMania within 5 years. Batista, a green but very menacing powerhouse. And of course, Rey Mysterio, who was one of, if not the most revolutionary wrestlers from the 90s. These men, for the most part, would go on to have Hall of Fame careers, winning over 40 world championships in total. And this might be the biggest positive to come from 2002 because, like I said, WWE was getting desperate and they managed to turn these rookies into huge draws. Rey Mysterio is the most popular masked wrestler to this day. Batista increased Raw's ratings in 2005 after a few weak years. John Cena sold millions and millions and millions of merch, contributed to Raw ratings in 2005 as well. Randy Orton helped give Raw its highest ratings since 2002 with the Viper character. Brock Lesnar makes every match he's in feel much bigger than anything on the card, and if I could compare the 2002 class to anything, it's definitely the 2003 NBA draft. The debuting class made their mark unlike any other. It's rare to see so much talent emerge within 2 to 3 months like they did in 2002. 2002 didn't just mark debuts, it was also the year that saw the resurgence of the Big Show. Big Show kicking off the year was a glorified jobber. He had fallen really hard. After Paul Heyman got his hands on him, literally the month he got his hands on him, he made him WWE champion. The whole thing made Big Show relevant again, and he was sort of scary again. I give this a positive because the booking that Paul Heyman gave him brought him back to the top. It gave him notoriety, and sure, the title reign is forgettable as just about anything, but like I said, Big Show's notable again. You could take him seriously. Another return that I really love from 2002 WWE is, of course, Eddie Guerrero's. I talked about his run here, but long story short, I love this run because Eddie came in with a chip on his shoulder. It was like he owed it to himself to excel as a talent. The fire in his promos and matches were something else, and people's mullet Eddie was really built different. He was a very integral part of the SmackDown 6, capturing the tag team titles with his nephew Chavo. The momentum he started building during this run led to him being uber over with the fans a year later, and of course it led to that WWE Championship win in 2004. From an excellent return to a shocking return, I'd like to mention Hulk Hogan. As you may know, Hogan embarked on this nostalgia run that ironically was the same thing WWE trashed years earlier. WWE has old guys. We have the new generation, but that's not the point. Hogan turned grown adults into children once again by ditching the black and white in favor of the red and yellow. Hogan was so popular that he became, at the time, the oldest WWF champion, and ironically the final WWF champion as well. The pops he was getting was something current wrestlers can't even dream of getting. It was ridiculous, and the best thing to come from this run was his selflessness. I don't think we've ever seen a time where Hogan lost as much as he did in 2002. First of all, he took the L to Rock clean. Triple H, he lost to him clean. The Undertaker, dirty finish, of course. Kurt Angle made him tap out. That's the most shocking of them all. This is like having John Cena tap out to Roman Reigns. And of course, there's the Brock Lesnar match. Some say this was Hogan trying to show he's changed or something. There was also that tag team run with Edge that he couldn't believe happened. This is the same man Edge idolized as a kid. Now he's holding championship gold with him. However, the L's it was taken were going to have to be paid in interest. Apparently, a match between Brock and Hogan was planned for Survivor Series. Of course, Hogan was going to look tougher, but he wasn't going to take that L. He, of course, wanted to win it, though. Booking disputes ensued, and Hulkster walks out of the company for all of 2 months. And I just think it's hilarious to think that Hulk Hogan wanted to beat Brock Lesnar in the year of 2002. Bro, your career's already set. You're down in history. Time for the new guys. You guys know that. I don't see why I mentioned it. From Hulk Hogan to The Undertaker. To me, the big evil character The Undertaker created at the tail end of 2001 was cool. He finally found his form again. He was having better matches, promos, and this was after some people were telling him to retire. He didn't even reach his actual peak yet. That was in 2006. Big Evil was this bully type that did whatever he saw fit. He wasn't really scared of fights. He was the one picking them, actually. The Ric Flair feud was probably my favorite of his from 02 because of the personal animosity. Ric Flair had doubts over his ability, but they managed to have a good match at WrestleMania. This title run, of course, featured that superb Jeff Hardy ladder match that made him look excellent in defeat, and JR's quote, "Make yourself famous, kid," is stuck with me to this very day. There was some superb storytelling with Jeff refusing to stay down, and despite the fact that he beat on him after the match twice, Taker couldn't help but gain respect for that bastard. After that, he was back to being the babyface we all know and love. Unlike 2000 and 2001, Undertaker had a much better collection of matches and stories, and obviously there's some blunders, but that's expected because for some reason, the Brothers of Destruction always get booked in questionable stories. Like I said, 2002 marked the resurgence of The Undertaker. He was way better than previously, and 2002 was also the year where many perceived Kurt Angle as an all-time great. This is the time period where the man had it figured out. I think up to this point, 2002 was the year with the best collection of matches for himself. Not only that, but he was involved in what many consider the best match of 2002, a top 5 triple threat match, and from an in-ring standpoint, you can't tell me anybody who had a better year than Kurt Angle. From the Edge matches to his storyline with Rey Mysterio, he was superb in everything. Especially after he lost his hair. It's like that was the one minor thing keeping him back from reaching his full form or something. 2002 Kurt Angle is certainly an all-timer, but then again, you can say the same for 2005 or even 2007 Kurt Angle. I could go on and on and on about the awesomeness of Kurt Angle circa 2002, you know, the legend status that he carved in such a short time, but we got other things to talk about. I gotta stop myself from talking about Kurt Angle. From an all-time great to a very superb time for the women's division. After the invasion and after the brand split was created, the WWE actually woke up from the long nap and realized that they had a women's division. With the division being taken seriously now, it opened up the doors for the likes of Molly Holly. Gunn was a superhero character, rather a stern, independent woman who quickly captured championship gold. Jazz was the tough, aggressive woman who at times was dominant. Lita, well, she wasn't there at the time because of an injury. Jacqueline was kind of there, but not really. Ivory as well. Trish Stratus was a gutsy, pretty girl. And Victoria, oh man, she was built different. WWE made her into this very dangerous stalker who was absolutely unpredictable. With this wide array of talent, the Raw Women's Division managed to flourish and become a very entertaining part of Monday nights. My personal favorite feud, of course, was the Trish Stratus and Victoria thing, because it went a whole other direction compared to the women's feuds fans were accustomed to at the time. 2002 was also the year where Stratus slowly came into her own, and by 2003 she was one of the more skilled women. But the MVP from the women's side, in my opinion, has to be Victoria. She just came out of nowhere and had an excellent feud with Trish Stratus that resulted in her winning the title, and she was just an amazing character. That's my pick. What's yours? Another division that experienced success was the Cruiserweights. After a shaky invasion, the WWE opted to feature the Cruiserweights on SmackDown. I always seen 2002 to 2004's version of the division as WWE's best. You know, you had outrageous characters like the Hurricane and Jamie Noble, excellent yet short matches on pay-per-view, but unfortunately though, the division literally featured 3 men, that's all. It took a while for the division to develop and showcase other talent like Rey Mysterio, but for the time being, in 2002, it was pretty entertaining for what it was, you know? There wasn't that many guys in the division. That was the big problem. But yeah, Jamie Noble, Billy Kidman, they always had good matches on pay-per-view. Now this is the one I've been waiting to talk about. I'd like to talk about a tag team that seemed doomed, but ended up working out very well, and I mean very well. That being the tag team of Booker T and Goldust. Goldust was this very unusually awkward individual, and Booker, well, he didn't want to be near Goldust at all. Soon enough, he began stalking him, and this leads to a bunch of super entertaining segments. Like that segment with The Rock. They were completely opposites, and the amount of charisma and electricity those two brought could light up a city. I wouldn't say Booker and Goldust tag team was a positive of 2002. I'll say it was one of the best damn things, and I owe it to them to make an entire video on that run. It's for sure one of the best things, and if you've never watched any of their segments, what the hell are you waiting for? On the other side, on SmackDown, there was an entirely new gimmick that quickly caught storm. Matt Hardy version 1, the Sensei of Mattitude. For the first time ever, Matt was actually more relevant and notable than his brother. The gimmick in itself is essentially a time capsule back to the internet in the early 2000s. You know, Matt would randomly utter some internet terms. His entrance would begin with a login. There's an old ass loading screen, and boom, Matt fact on the bottom left corner, such as Matt Hardy played GTA Vice City last night. He enjoyed it. Matt Hardy didn't like Linkin Park's new Meteora album. These are random examples, and as for the real ones, my personal favorite is Matt likes pulp in his orange juice. It was a very entertaining gimmick, and it was a nice change of pace for Matt, who was always considered the other Hardy. Add to that, he ended up winning championship gold, and if you're interested, here's an entire video I made on his run. Moving on from V1, let's talk about Triple H's superb return in January 2002. You guys already know that by the end of the year, Triple H was one of the most reviled and despised wrestlers to have competed in that year, but in the beginning, it was the complete and utter opposite. After being out for tearing his quad, the WWF fans were in anticipation for any sights of the game. They played those YouTube Beautiful Day vignettes, and even though this was the same man who ran over Austin, the same man who destroyed the McMahon family, he did all kinds of vile things, the fans couldn't wait for him, and it made for a very legendary moment in MSG. The pop that the game received was deafening, and it's very unlikely we'll see something like it again. It's a moment which even brought the game himself to tears. Like, that's how much that moment meant to him. We can talk about the beginning of the Reign of Terror occurring this year, Katie Vick, but at the end of the day, it won't take anything away from January 7th, 2002. With that said, one minor detail about 2002 that I really loved is the identity of the shows. For good and for bad, SmackDown and Raw are very different. You can feel a very different vibe from both shows. You know, Raw on Mondays was more about the segments and the shocking moments, whereas SmackDown was a bit more grounded and had much better wrestling to it. There was obviously some Raw-ish segments there, Raw-ish storylines like the Tori Wilson and Dawn Marie thing, but overall as a show, I prefer SmackDown. Obviously, there's going to be others that prefer Raw. There's not many of them, but I hear about them. But regardless, they treated their brands like real TV shows and tried to separate them. There was different booking teams, different divisions, everything, and it did remain like that for years to follow, but the brand split was never enforced as seriously like it was in 2002. Which leads me to my next point, the pay-per-views. Wow. After the brand split officially began, the pay-per-views were suddenly so good. Like, other than King of the Ring, every pay-per-view delivered, and I go as far as to say that every event from Vengeance to 2002 to WrestleMania 19 was good to great. There was 4-star matches, excellent stories told throughout 3 hours, and what about the theme songs? Like, the theme songs, the rock / new metal songs that dominated at the time. And if you listen to one, you're going to listen to a bunch of them. With regards to the best pay-per-view, in my opinion, it goes to SummerSlam. I don't even need to explain why, but I want to know what's yours. Another thing 2002 is lauded for with good reason is the ridiculous star power. Like, WWE didn't need to have that many stars on this roster. At one point in time, they had Stone Cold, The Rock, Triple H, The Undertaker, Hulk Hogan, Kevin Nash, Booker T, Chris Benoit, Chris Jericho, Brock Lesnar, Kurt Angle. This was without the likes of Randy Orton, Rey Mysterio, Shawn Michaels, and Scott Steiner debuting / returning. 2003 technically was more stacked, but like I said, the roster was completely bloated, and it made the shows even more entertaining when looking back. Obviously, some of the stories were botched, but it's still nice to see that many talent under one company for a show or moment. That roster had technical skill, charisma, promo skill, psychology, everything. And it made the games even better than they already were. With that said, I'd like to remind you guys of a very underrated return. That being the Dudleys at Survivor Series 2002. Now, it was very cool to see the team who were once separated and who were once battling each other reunite. Like, Bubba was on Raw getting this weird mini push that many believed ended when he botched a Triple H powerbomb, but he was doing well. Devon, though, he was doing nothing. Then again, he beat Triple H and John Cena within 3 months, so that's something. But when you look back at 2002 WWE, it just feels off to see these two separated. Like, they're meant to be together. And the match itself, you know, the tables match, 3-minute warning against the Dudleys and Jeff Hardy. It was very ridiculous in a good way. It was like a car crash match or something. The moment those two crossed paths, the fans went insane. JR marked out as well, and they went on to have one final run in WWE before disappearing from the company for 10 years. And then, of course, there's my favorite return of 2002, Shawn Michaels. So last time people saw HBK in a wrestling ring, he had an Austin 316 shirt shamefully covering him. His nagging back problem as well as other issues kept Michaels away from the squared circle. Despite this, he was making over $700K a year just to randomly strip off his clothes and say a few words every month. He seemed like a return was far away, but as time went on, it was becoming more possible. Now, one misconception people have was that HBK's back was injured for 4 years. It wasn't. It wasn't injured for that long. I believe he had surgery in 1999, and so he was kind of ready to go, but his other problems, you know, the drug-related and all that, and his attitude, were keeping him away. And then WWE had him return in the NWO. Random, but who cares? Shawn Michaels is back on TV. Then the story that they were originally going to book gets scrapped, and the replacement ended up being even better. The story itself was Triple H, his best friend, turning on him, leading to this epic announcement from Michaels who says he'll make a full recovery by SummerSlam. They have this superb match of the night, and one of the very best from that year, and the belief was that HBK was done, you know? Turns out, he's got that itch that led to a full-time run that rivals his original one. HBK didn't need to come back and have classic matches like he did. His career was already in the books, but he did it anyways and ensured his spot as one of the all-time greats. Now, before I say what and who were the best things from 2002, you know, Wrestler of the Year, Rookie of the Year, all that, my opinion, of course, I gotta mention one of the greatest pro wrestling games that you and I played. SmackDown, Shut Your Mouth. This was the ultimate WWE game. Like, before this, there had never been a game featuring that much content to it. It's ridiculous, and unfortunately, since the game came before Here Comes the Pain, it gets overshadowed. It had everything, and I mean it. Alternate attires, a feature which WWE games lacked for about 12 years. And also, before this, there was 0 alternate attires. If you played with The Rock beforehand, you'd play with the same Rock who was wearing the same trunks. You wouldn't get to play with the track pants Rock. You never got the chance. It featured every pay-per-view arena from mid-2001 to mid-2002. The gameplay was much smoother than just Bring It. The graphics were way better, and I have so many memories of this game playing it on the PS2. I used to grind hard for the alternate attires in arenas and season mode, and don't even get me started on the storylines in that game. Like the NWO randoming the ambulance into you like in real life. The roster was so damn bloated. Match selection was unlike anything that had ever been seen before. I could go on and on about that game in a whole other video, just the memories I made from it. Wow. Overall, it excels in nearly every facet, but it unfortunately gets overshadowed. It destroyed just bringing in every area, no stone left unturned, except for crowdfunding and some 5-star Taz commentary. But yeah, Shut Your Mouth is one of the greatest wrestling games of all time. With that said, who is Rookie of the Year? Easy. Brock Lesnar. Why Brock? Well, for one, this freak of nature was 24 going on 25 when debuting, and immediately he received a push to the top so fast, it took him 5 months and 7 days, which is completely unheard of in this day and age, to win the title. Not only that, but he bested Hulk Hogan, The Rock, and The Undertaker within 2.5 months. You can't say anybody else, and even if you did, they don't come close to Lesnar's accomplishments. So yeah, he had such a monster year. By the end of it, he was heading towards a main event at WrestleMania 19. This was all within his first year. Now, who's the best promo? I think this goes to The Rock. He obviously wasn't there often, but regardless, he got the crowd laughing in it into every single one of his segments. Best tag team? Now, this one is a bit tricky because the major teams like the Hardys, APA, and Dudley split in March. And it's a struggle to choose one team. You know, there was Christian / Y2J, Los Guerreros. You can go with Angle and Benoit, or even Edge and Ray, who are my personal favorites. It's really hard to choose who's the best because those 3 teams were connected to each other for the most part. So it wouldn't really make a difference. My favorite, like I said, was Ray and Edge, but I'm gonna go with Los Guerreros probably. It's very hard to choose one, and I'm pretty certain you guys will struggle as well. Best moment? Damn, there's a lot to choose. My favorite is either HBK kipping up at SummerSlam 2002, because that spot signified that the showstopper's back. Years of anguish and struggles were finally gone. Well, for 2 minutes because Triple H destroyed his back with a sledgehammer. But the best is probably the tense stare down between Rock and Hogan at WrestleMania 18. It was 2 generations colliding, and nobody imagined that the match would happen a year ago. Best segment, well, my personal favorite is probably Kurt Angle on September 12, 2002. He completely embarrassed himself in this segment, like he was trying too hard to make himself look good, but he failed miserably. Kurt Angle circa 2002 was the best mix of wrestling, comedy, series, promo, but we can't talk about it. I told you guys earlier on, we can't be talking about Kurt Angle the entire time. The best segment is Ruthless Aggression, I think. It had a lasting effect on the shows as young guys came in trying to seize the moment. Best show? Well, most of us agree that it was SmackDown. It had superb wrestling, great characters and stories, and unlike Raw, it didn't have that one big cloud hanging over it. Like, whatever bad, terrible stuff SmackDown had, it certainly wasn't around the main event scene. Except for this, it was pretty unnecessary. Anyways, what's the best feud? Well, my favorite is Triple H and HBK. The intensity of the story, HBK returning and making a full-on comeback, I love it. The best is probably SmackDown 6. It's more of a tag team program, but the whole thing was something special. You know, every week a random combination of the 6 men would go out there and have a 4-star match. This continued throughout 2003. Sure, they weren't teaming up anymore, with the guys crossed paths on several occasions. Match of the year? My favorite is, of course, the triple threat main event from Vengeance. There was star power, there was action, memorable moments, it had it all, and best of all, there was a title change. But the best match is either the Chamber or the Unsanctioned match. Honorable mention goes to the Lesnar / Taker Hell in a Cell, and the tag title match from the same pay-per-view, which many consider to be the best match of 2002. And lastly, MVP. Well, who was the MVP of 2002 WWE? There are only 2 men you could say are worthy of MVP with the year they had. There's Kurt Angle and Brock Lesnar. Why those 2? Well, Kurt Angle to me was the best damn in-ring performer of 2002. It was the total package, sorry Lex. The amount of great matches he had in the entire year far away eclipses anybody else. I lost count on how many funny promos he had as well, and Brock Lesnar on the other hand, his resume speaks for itself. WWE Champion, King of the Ring, he beat Hogan, Rock, and Taker, you know how it went. Other than that, there's of course the man himself, Devon, who beat both Triple H and John Cena. But for me, I'm going to have to go with Brock Lesnar because of the fact that he ascended so quickly. By the end of 2002, he's one of the top guys and was on his way to becoming a huge star. That's 2002. Overall, it had its ups and downs, but what is remembered is mostly the good. Rey Mysterio, Brock Lesnar, John Cena, Randy Orton, Edge's push, the new wave of talent that dominated WWE in the late 2000s. That's what's remembered best from it. Obviously, there was some stupid stuff, but for the most part, there were some very good things to come out of the year. So yeah. After a very rocky 2002 that saw a name change, a brand split, and several talent come in and out of the company, 2003 seemed mellowed out. Of course, this is in comparison to 2002. If you compare it to another year, you might say something else. In the ever-changing landscape of WWE, 2003 saw strip teases in abundance, family feuds, retirements, and of course new talent on the rise. So let's get into it. When the likes of Austin and Rock left in 2002, it was clear that WWE needed somebody to lead. On SmackDown, they had the talent, and in addition, the likes of Kurt Angle and The Undertaker. Raw, though, was a bit different. They did have a world title at one point, and the man to lead the brand at the time was obvious: Triple H. There was some options there, such as RVD, but unlike Van Dam, Triple H was in the family. He wasn't going to leave like Austin and Rock did. He becomes champion, some decent matches and programs with the likes of HBK, but just when 2003 was around the corner, everything fell off. Triple H was supposed to have this program with Scott Steiner that had a lot of expectations towards it because this was Big Papa Pump's first real storyline in the company. They have a bunch of competition, some were hilarious looking back, and then the promo for their match turns out to be the best damn thing to come out of their feud. Why? Well, calling what they had a match would be putting it simply. Scott Steiner's all tired and fatigued early on, and even though he had a broken foot, he was still applying pressure with those belly-to-belly overthrows, and with the way it was going, it was like he was trying to break a record of sorts. It was disastrous, and with that, his push was over. They have a sequel that's slightly better, but Steiner's done. Off to WrestleMania, Triple H becomes racist for a month, and the story was looking like it's building towards a Booker T victory. It was going to be nice and all, but then he hits a pedigree and lies on the mat for a long-ass time before going for the cover. Why would they book a story like that? Well, as The Rock says, because. I don't want to talk about this. This storyline's been talked about a million times. Kevin Nash is here, and barring a few moments, this feud was forgettable. Triple H was gaining a reputation, a bad one at that, for taking up too much time, for taking up too much of the spotlight, and having bad matches. If he had good matches, no doubt about it, he wasn't going to get all this hate. Then Goldberg comes around and loses at SummerSlam despite the champion being injured, and it's of course a financial tactic because now Goldberg's incensed and he's got to put up his career at Unforgiven to challenge for the title. He wins, Reign of Terror mellows out for a bit. Things were calm. But only one thing did remain. One thing did remain, however, and that was Triple H's long-ass promos. And once again, if he lost some matches that should have been booked at the time, others wouldn't have hated it as much as they did. I personally hate this topic because everyone and their mom talked about it on YouTube, and you see the same takes. So there's not much to add, and if it wasn't for the fact that I'm making a year video, I wouldn't be talking about it. Meanwhile, on SmackDown, the McMahons were all over the place, whether it's John Cena smacking Stephanie's ass or Vince being with Sable. Am I gonna lie and say some of these stories weren't entertaining? No. Mr. McMahon's feud with Mr. America provided the memorable lie detector test. Zach Gallen signing with the company, having a feud with the boss is inspirational, but at times it was too much. Like, we got a talented roster in front of us. They can talk, they can dance, wrestle, whatever, and the McMahon family drama should have been left in 2000 in favor of them. But no, family drama was on the menu. It of course led to that Vince and Stephanie match at No Mercy, which was very bizarre. Stephanie lost her role as GM due to her getting married and therefore going away, so Paul Heyman becomes GM and immediately chose his favorites. There was more to do with the current talent. I just don't see why they could have done the McMahon story. It wasn't the Attitude Era anymore. Things have changed, and there was a talented roster in front of them. SmackDown 2003 is notorious for a couple of things. One of these things that seemed so random was Mr. America and Roddy Piper randomly feuding. Like, why the hell are these two restarting something from 20 years earlier? Maybe it's somewhere nostalgic, but I doubt it went beyond that. I mean, if this feud was good, we'd be talking about it right now. That said, it's not like everything that's memorable is good. Triple H's run was memorable, but not for the right reasons. Which leads me to the WCW disappointments. As you know, Raw kind of had a WCW vibe in 2003. The commentary table was on the stage, and of course, a bunch of talent from WCW was on Raw. 2003 saw the returns of Scott Steiner and Kevin Nash. Both men's returns seemed very optimistic initially and was going to provide a much needed shot in the arm to the main event scene. By the end of the year, though, none of these men were even close to the mid-card, let alone. Nash was gone, so that kind of goes against that claim. Otherwise, he would have faced Goldberg for sure, and the only reason why he didn't face him was because he suffered an injury. The Steiner, though, was finished, and to top it all off, Goldberg, despite having a successful run on paper, was extremely disappointing and disappointed with the company itself. These three were supposed to be game changers to the Raw brand, and only Goldberg was that, and even then, his run isn't looked at fondly. With 2003 being the year the likes of Christian were sent out to fly on their own and prosper, Lance Storm suffered the exact opposite. We even known this, but Storm isn't the most charismatic characters. What he's known for is his in-ring stuff, and anything else, well, maybe that, if I could be serious for a moment, thing that he used to say. He was given a lot at this point to show some character, and at one point, Stone Cold even called him boring to his face, slept on the stage, and this forced Storm to get out of his comfort zone in some very random segments. Some of these were funny, but he clearly showed that he was lacking, and for as much as he did, it wasn't enough to warrant a push in the eyes of management. If it did work, I feel Storm would have done more in WWE, but that's common knowledge. With the 2000s being the 2000s, WWE's philosophy was whatever. Violence, plenty. Language, sure. And of course, the sexual stuff. The Divas were wearing some very revealing clothing, at times taking them off, and some of the stories revolved around the likes of Tori Wilson stripping. And at one point, Sean O'Haire managed to convince Dawn to show her boobs, and of course, there was the Miller Lite partnership at WrestleMania 19. Things get calm for only 5 minutes because Sable is here, and she was the one who practically brought sex appeal to the forefront in WWE. Girls Gone Wild partnership is in effect. Tori Wilson and Sable have a marquee segment at Judgment Day, and from my perspective, May of 2003 is probably the perviest month in WWE. Every week they're talking Girls Gone Wild. Stacy's out here giving Scott Steiner lap dances. Maybe that's in June, but 2003 was really on something in that area, and this is just the stuff I mentioned because there's more. I thought 2002 was crazy in that department, and it is. But 03 really puts up a fight. Theodore Long up to 2002 had a nice career. He managed several icons in the industry, Butch Reed and Ron Simmons, The Undertaker, Sid, many. He became a referee and was a standout in the Attitude Era, and with the Ruthless Aggression Era in full swing, he was brought on as a manager. Manager to Rodney Mack. Mack was hyped up initially and in kayfabe was so confident of his abilities that he challenged any white person in the challenge known as the White Boy Challenge. Teddy Long would be trashing the jobbers and Mack would beat them quickly. Unfortunately for him, this didn't last long and Goldberg ended up ruining everything. Being a good guy though, Goldberg actually wanted to keep the streak going in real life. He felt for Rodney Mack, but they weren't going to do that. There was no way. Mark Henry returns from one of his many developmental stints against Booked Strong to close out the year with Teddy Long as his promo. It was a team that could have challenged and even won that title because, as I say, the Raw Tag Team division wasn't all that at the time. They could have provided depth for the tag division, which was essentially La Resistance and the Dudley Boys, and the duo stood out because of how different they were in their approach and had this aggression that stood out. And plus, they had Teddy Long. But things didn't work out for the duo. Around the fall of 2002, Test received a sudden change. For one, he was now a face, and two, he had a new look. This coincided with his relationship with Stacy Keibler. That was the entire cause of all these things. He's having a good relationship with her and had direction. Then in kayfabe, he's out here partying and losing focus of the fact that Stacy Keibler's in front of him. Test was losing it a bit and felt the need to check on Tori Wilson's magazine, and every time he gets caught doing something, he's acting all aggressive and trying to downplay the situation. And this happened at the worst possible time because Big Papa Pump was near. His presence was immediately a threat, and Stacy saw him as a potential tag team partner. That doesn't work as she's out here giving him lap dances, much to the frustration of Test. It got to the point where Test was without a girl and had to fight Steiner in a match to reclaim her. Life's bad for Stacy, but then it get worse as Steiner was now Test's server. Then in a random twist, he turned heel and they made her their dog. Why? Because if you were a heel in the 2000s, you have to do this stuff. It's essential. The run itself was very random. With that said, Mick Foley fired them and Stacy was free. The story was very wacky. A lot of stuff happened during the whole thing. It brings a different vibe to Raw 2003, and again, this is one of those things you'll never see in this current day and age. You just won't, because as I said, it's a different time. Back then, they were doing everything that they thought of. Anything they thought in their mind, they'd be throwing it out there. They'd be booking a storyline, making a 3-month story out of it. They won't do that now. They just won't. Now, SmackDown on the other side didn't really have an empty hole to fill in for a romance story. That kind of sounds weird, because Jamie Noble was so bricked up over Playboy magazines because he received an inheritance. He got the confidence to go after Tori Wilson, who was with Billy Gunn at the time, and this is one thing to mention, is that Noble already had an interaction with Wilson earlier in the year, but it went about as well as Goldberg's original WWE run. It got to the point where Noble won the right to sleep with her, and again, only in the Attitude and Ruthless Aggression eras will you see something like this. He had his own girlfriend, but it didn't matter because this was Tori Wilson, and 2 is better than 1. He was going for the brace. Turns out they wanted Billy to join in, and Noble and Nydia turned face. It's very early 2000s WWE stuff. It doesn't seem out of place when you see what they were doing in the past couple of years. But you know what did seem out of place though? The Cruiserweight division. With the advent of WCW wrestlers, and in particular shorter athletic talent that could execute all kinds of ridiculous feats, you saw different names enter the world of WWE. Some from WCW, some from ECW, a lot of talent, but it seemed like some of the best was yet to come. Why? Because Ultimo Dragon had finally signed with WWE. Dragon's collection of matches from several promotions, including WCW, would make any fan excited for him to join the WWE. Fans seen Rey Mysterio immediately prosper and reach heights he never did in WCW, and so it led to the question of, hey, what's Ultimo Dragon gonna do? This man had more titles than Nick Cannon has kids all around the world, and in addition, he's already wrestled on national television in the United States. Unfortunately though, this is looking at Ultimo Dragon on paper. After suffering an arm injury in 1998, the doctors botched his surgery, causing him nerve damage, and he was forced to retire. By the time he returned in 2002, it wasn't the same, and in addition, he was much older. His debut brought great optimism, but nothing came out of his entire run. And it was such an iconic name that was overlooked. The only pay-per-view appearance he has was at WrestleMania 20, which was ironically a dream of his to compete at Madison Square Garden and WrestleMania. The run was a success. Of course, if he had his 1997 form, I highly doubt he would have been relegated to Velocity. Maybe they would have. I just doubt it though. On the other side of the spectrum, the SmackDown Tag Team division was doing much better. The idea Paul Heyman had for the SmackDown 6 morphed into a full-on tag team division. It gave the world's greatest tag team and Los Guerreros a platform, and those two teams were involved in several incredible matches throughout 2003, especially Haas and Benjamin. They were flying all over the place in matches with Brock Lesnar, climbing ladders in matches against Eddie and Tajiri, and having an iconic match against Ray and Billy Kidman. On Raw, though, the division wasn't that memorable. La Resistance came in with the most generic, I hate America, we're foreigners thing. The Dudleys were doing some stuff, but it didn't feel as important as what SmackDown was doing with the tag team division. Storm and Regal started off the year. There was some sort of power thing over the Dudleys. Kane and RVD had a decent run, but for most of the year, it was about La Resistance and the Dudleys. If it was awesome, obviously it would have stood out, but it wasn't. It was just there. You know, it was very dull at times. On Raw's lower card division, the Hurricane was floating around taking ass kickings. His superhero skills were clearly no match to others, so he required a sidekick, a superhero in training, Rosie. Rosie had already been a part of 3-Minute Warning, but after Jamal's bar fight and subsequent release, he was in limbo. But the Hurricane needed a sidekick and Rosie was up for the job. But Rosie was up for the task. He wanted to be a superhero, and this led to a couple of funny segments between the two, with Rosie struggling to adapt to being a good guy. Hurricane really made him work for it, and upon graduation, the duo became a tag team wrestling mostly on Heat. And whenever Hurricane would show up on TV, he would get his ass beat. Now, Hurricane, of course, was used to this. He wasn't doing the ass kicking, but you can't say the same for Hardcore Holly. It was the contrary. Heading into 2003, Hardcore Holly was on the shelf after being dropped on his neck in a match with Brock Lesnar. Hardcore had plenty of injuries in the past, but none as damaging as this. Since this was 2000's WWE, they made it into a storyline. The big bad Bob Holly would get a chance to return the favor to Brock Lesnar, who had enjoyed a tremendous 2003. He found glory, wrestled in the main event of WrestleMania, and during all of that time, Hardcore was stuck in the shadows due to his actions. He returns, and I'm telling you now, this man was 95 overall, especially if he came out with the jeans. The man was destroying Brock and anybody that tried to come his way, and it was almost a dream come true for Holly, who once said that he should be booked to beat everyone and become champion. The champion part, of course, didn't happen, but this man was nothing short of dangerous for a couple of weeks. He showed a level of viciousness and aggression that at the time straight up was matched by nobody on SmackDown. Even Brock Lesnar didn't look this crazy. Matter of fact, he was running away from him. It was a way out of making something out of the injury, and I'd say it did its job. No doubt about it. It was the biggest thing Hardcore Holly had up to this point. Now, 2003 compared to other years had a bunch of notable releases. This was around the time where the roster was extremely stacked, and so it meant some cuts had to happen. Raven was one talent released. I don't think he was too bothered by it because he had some bizarre 7 Deadly Sins story that was a failure. It was so bad. It's something that would make you look in the other direction. It's horrible. Bull Buchanan was another name released, D'Lo Brown, Kevin Kelly, and then right after WrestleMania, Jeff Hardy. Hardy's release almost comes as a surprise, but if you look at the events that led to it, it's the contrary. Hardy had a lot of personal problems that affected his work. He wasn't performing well, his attitude was different, and they released him. Of course, the door was open, but the charismatic Enigma had to wait it out. His release wasn't even the biggest headline of the year, as within the span of a week, WWE released Roddy Piper and Mr. America. Roddy Piper was in an HBO show talking about the wrestling business, and this got him released. He was with Sean O'Hare, and that basically ruined his push, although technically it was over by this point. And Mr. America, well, Hulk Hogan, had issues with the usual stuff. This is the same stuff, you know. His contract, WrestleMania payout, and he disliked being booked behind Brock Lesnar and Kurt Angle. Why? Because he thinks it's 1991. Now, he was a top guy, no doubt about it. Even in the year of 2003, and you go forward, that's the same story. John Cena was on top in 05 and 06, but I also loved Hulk Hogan. I thought this guy was one of the best. But at some point, you had to look forward, but the way they treated him here was on point because he was a big part of the show. Just not the main story, although even that's debatable. Hogan was so disappointed by being featured on SmackDown as well because Raw was considered the A show, and business-wise, it was. So that explains why whenever he returned, it was on Raw. Crash Holly was released around this time. Nathan Jones quit when WWE was on tour in Australia. He couldn't continue with the schedule. It took a lot out of him, and he decided to stay home. Christopher Nowinski's time after Tough Enough looked like a huge opening for him to enter the world of WWE. His Harvard heel character was doing well for him and getting him some heat. He was doing his own thing, but the moment he came down to an injury, it was the beginning of the end. He suffered a concussion during the Raw Rumble after Edge and Rey Mysterio double drop kicked him. They didn't connect well, and the Harvard graduate was sidelined. Then he suffered yet another concussion in June of 2003, and it was expected to leave him sidelined for a bit, but it turned out to end his career. He was slowly phased out, and it was very premature. He was in a tag team with Roddy Mack. They beat the Dudleys, and he was done, just like that. For himself, he looks at it as a blessing in disguise, of course, because of his work with CTE. But you just gotta wonder, like, what could have been of Christopher Nowinski? Because the man was athletic, he had a good heel character, and I'm not saying this guy would have been world champion or anything like that, but who knows? Maybe he could have been IC champion. It's tough to say. I know he was kind of jobbing a lot at the time, but you never know. The Cruiserweight division was in full swing. After the WWE split their roster, SmackDown got the division, and it's unfortunate to say this, but 2003 was its peak. The reason why it's unfortunate is because it was so good for a short time. Tajiri and Billy Kidman, Matt Hardy version 1 losing weight to get to 215, and the fast-paced matches really stood out here because the rest of the matches on the shows were more of the same. The Cruiserweights matches weren't that long, but they made the most out of their minutes and almost never disappointed. The division was at its most valued, and after here, that would be a different story. As always, the year can't go by without injuries, and 2003 had its fair share. A lot of these injuries were significant and affected the on-screen product. Chris Nowinski's concussion, William Regal's problem was very strange compared to others. However, during a trip to India, he fell ill, he can't sleep, and now suffers a concussion. His situation was so out of the left field and was unusual. Turns out, he had a rare heart condition and looked death in the eye. The distance between Regal and death is the distance between your fingers, and at one point, he was considered retired. There was one point where they were about to cut his leg off because he developed sepsis. So Regal went from a nearly fatal end to almost being amputated, to considered retired, to training for his return. It was truly a remarkable return, but it took him a year. He didn't return until after WrestleMania 20. On the other side, Edge, who was on the verge of superstardom, had to nurse a neck injury which was caused by the multiple ladder matches. The most significant was the no DQ match with Eddie Guerrero. After a sunset flip, Edge felt a crack in his neck, and it wasn't the same from there. He had his finger on the pulse at this point, and he was slowly reaching his final form as a babyface. And just to understand, I'm not saying some wouldn't have turned on him later and he liked that. However, Edge was all fired up, and you couldn't say the same for his 2004 run. Here, anything was possible, but he ran into the brick wall that was injuries. And neck injuries are amongst the worst in the wrestling industry. So Edge missed the entire year and had to be sidelined for WrestleMania 19 and 20. Two WrestleManias where he could have made an impact have turned into missed opportunities. Those two events were deprived from him, and to top it all off, had to come back to a crowd that wasn't down with his character. Kurt Angle was on the verge of missing WrestleMania as well due to nagging neck injuries. His situation was a bit different, however, his Angle was out of his mind and in another realm far away from this universe. Brock Lesnar was very close to winning the title from him and facing Chris Benoit in the main event. Benoit was a viable opponent, and for a replacement, it can't get any better than him. Angle fought through and managed to make it to Seattle, though, where Brock Lesnar looked worse off by the end of it as he almost destroyed his own neck. Batista and Randy Orton hurt themselves in February and almost put a stop to the Evolution faction. The leader himself had a groin injury, which really should have been tended to immediately because the man was unable to wrestle long matches, not to mention he was feuding with Goldberg. It led to the game wearing the biker shorts for a couple of months and getting bloated. It was a tough time. The Divas division of 2003 is probably the peak of this era. It had been building slowly, more and more talent was being featured. After 2003, it got weaker for certain, but that's not the point. Work done to build up talent like Molly Holly and Jazz was paying off in 2003. Victoria in particular had a standout run in the early parts of the year, as she was a very unique character that stood out from the division, and what helped a lot was her effort into making Victoria somebody who was truly deranged. Her hype faded after WrestleMania, but was slowly rekindled heading into 2004. Jazz's year was looking very optimistic. She became the women's champion, and right when things are going well, she suffers an injury and goes away for 6 months. At the same time emerged a new face, Gail Kim. Gail Kim's reputation to the wider audience was largely unknown. She had made a name for herself on the indies and was somewhat mysterious, especially because the vignettes airing for her were inspired by some early 2000s stuff like The Matrix. And they made her champion on her very first night. It's a very crazy decision, especially because nobody was familiar with her, and winning a title in the first night is absolutely tough because on one side, it can legitimize that individual, or two, it could overrate them. In Gail Kim's case, especially if you look at the clips involving her on Confidential, she had a unique ability which was suppressed, so basically she was almost a Matrix character without the charm in her first few months. That's the only thing she had to her. Her wrestling ability wasn't really shown that much, it was limited. And so she held the title for a month. She didn't hold it for long. Instead, Molly Holly became champion. And I think when we look at this time period's champions, the champions from this Divas era, this Molly Holly title reign is the true standout. She held the title for nearly 8 months and actually defended the gold often, because long title reigns, especially women's title reigns, had a problem where the champion would hold said gold for long, but didn't have much of a catalog. Molly didn't have that problem and easily eclipsed her 2002 run. What makes this run so good is the variety. Molly had some nice matches with the likes of Gail Kim, Lita, Trish Stratus, Victoria, and there's no doubt in my mind that Molly Holly was the women's wrestler of 2003. She used to wrestle aggressively, trying to rip open someone's jaw, and at the same time she'd be showing off some impressive athleticism by hitting the Molly go-round. And one thing to mention is that the women in general didn't have that strong promotion like they do today. As strong as this era was in the women's division, it lacked a true focus and identity and a desire from higher ups for it to succeed. Because I'm pretty certain if that was the case, everything about this era would be a different story. 2003 was another step in the right direction for the women's division. Things heated up with Lita's return around the end of the year, and heading into 2004, the return of Jazz, Victoria as a face, but this was as good as it was going to get for a while. While the likes of Randy Orton and Rey Mysterio were making a name for themselves as newcomers, or in Rey's case being reborn with the mask, Christian was looking to finally carve his own path. As a tag team wrestler, Christian needs no introduction. Whether it's with Edge or Chris Jericho, he's excelled in that area, and Christian was a bit decent as a singles wrestler. It's just his identity was mostly associated with somebody else. And throughout 2003, he was largely associated with Chris Jericho. But that said, he made some strides into becoming his own guy and embarked on a journey that would see him become one of the most decorated champions of the 2000s. For one, he captured the Intercontinental Championship and took advice from The Rock on becoming a special kind of talent. This caused a change of character. Christian cut his hair, started calling himself the Captain Charisma, and it was a noticeable change because of how he carried himself. He was mostly the same guy as previously, but it's like he had a chip on his shoulder. His latter match with RVD was one of the very best matches of 2003, and this set him on a path that changed the trajectory of his career, because without the change, he wouldn't become popular in 2005, maybe he wouldn't have had a great run in TNA. Sometimes just thinking about 2003 WWE brings some random moments to mind. The GGW pay-per-view that's unreleased, the White Boy Challenge, Spike Dudley taking that nasty bump on the table, Rene Dupree winning a title at 19, that segment with Shane McMahon and Kane at the restaurant, Eddie Guerrero destroying Tajiri for bumping into his lowrider. There's a lot of stuff that comes to mind. At this point in time, WWE had made no doubt about it that it was an entertainment company. It was more entertainment than wrestling, and this was expanded on in the coming years. WWE Films was created. The documentaries from 2004 were in a very unscripted style where the wrestlers spoke about their matches and stories from a real place, but 2003 had this show called Confidential. Confidential was an inside look into the lives of WWE wrestlers. It brought a lot of insight into previous stories, current stories at times, and sometimes, I sound redundant, current stories at times, and occasionally the wrestlers would show off their dates. I like it because it makes you feel like you're reliving that era, especially if somebody like Stone Cold's out driving a truck at a military base, or The Rock's talking about filming Walking Tall. It's another side that you don't normally see of the wrestlers, and on the contrary, sometimes it adds more to the legitimacy of a character such as Randy Orton, who would show off at a car dealership or photo shoot. It's unfortunate that it didn't last long because I kind of like these things, and Confidential was bonus content. A lot of the insight brought on from the show was great, and it's unfortunate that it ended. I kind of wish that they continued doing it after 2004. Ever since Shawn Michaels' return in 2002, the big question was, will he continue? There's a lot of doubts because at the end of the day, Michaels had been away from the squared circle for 4 years. But he was feeling it, and slowly what was a one-time thing turned into a permanent stay. Chris Jericho was initially supposed to face Edge at WrestleMania 19, but managed to catch fire with Shawn Michaels, leading to one hell of a match. A match that many consider to have stole the show. And the program itself was very strong and showed that Shawn Michaels was here to stay. His performances were a step above almost everybody and showed that he had a place in this era. For Jericho, it was another notch up his belt and brought optimism for his future, especially after the previous WrestleMania, which was simultaneously his professional peak and absolute most disappointing time in the last few years. Y2J was in fine form. His year was mostly as an upper mid-carder, but you would be pressed to find a disappointing performance whether on the mic or in the ring. He brought in the highlight reel, which was absolutely hilarious, entertaining, and he was electric. Shawn Michaels, though, it was business as usual, and as good as he was, and he was amazing, he was world class, he was on a whole other level, we still hadn't saw his final form, which would come into its own in the following years. Unfortunately for Stone Cold Steve Austin, you couldn't really say the same. Austin's walkout in 2002 was a huge story in the world of wrestling. The top face of the company, dissatisfied with his positioning in recent months and the questionable decisions surrounding him, opting to leave. Austin had a lot of problems outside of the ring as well and kept a low profile heading into late 2002. Rumors of a return circulate, especially because WWE's business was doing bad at this point without Rock and Austin, and it's a level of bad where there was a lot of doubts over the future of wrestling in America. After a high-rise building meeting, which was quoted by Austin as a situation where somebody could have been tossed out the window, and this was of course referring to the tension because at the end of the day, nothing was going to happen physically, of course. Vince and Austin came to a mutual agreement to begin work for his return. Austin had some issues with Triple H that aren't often talked about, but he spoke about them in an interview with Raw magazine in early 2003 and said, Triple H's constant reference to me taking my ball and going home. You want me to pull an Austin or whatever? Here's a guy who needs to stop worrying about me. I'm not even with the company right now. He needs to worry about his own character and drawing big money for the company. Oh, but the business is in a down cycle. That's very convenient. In my view, he's not where he should be with the amount of TV time invested in him. Aw, man. Austin settled things and everything was set up for one more round at WrestleMania. Was this supposed to be his last match? Most likely, because Austin had racked up a lot of nagging injuries. His neck was still a big problem, and 2001 felt like his last true year because he was going all out. And these were the type of performances that hadn't been seen since 1997. It made too much sense for him to hang up his boots after a match with The Rock at WrestleMania 19, where he would return the favor. The day before the show, he was hospitalized because he drank too many energy drinks. This wasn't a huge problem, but having your heart beating as fast as Austin's did would definitely have you thinking a lot. The next night, he has a classic with The Rock, a match that not many have the luxury of closing their career with. Austin ended things at the perfect time. Would have been cool to see him feud with Evolution? Maybe, but we'll never know how it would truly go down because his body was broken and nearly destroyed at this point. And it was an amazing way to close out his career. He didn't even go away afterwards. Instead, he took on the role of GM feuding with Eric Bischoff. Austin's time as a wrestler had a premature ending. To Austin himself, he most likely knew it would be the end the moment he returned, but at the same time, it doesn't feel like we were deprived of another run because it was satisfying. It was complete. His career was complete at this point. The mid-card on SmackDown had a healthy and strong selection of wrestlers. Some of these guys were on the cusp of the main event scene, like Chris Benoit. Benoit's performances were helping him build momentum, which would lead to a very memorable 2004 for him. The Rabid Wolverine was amongst the most respected wrestlers in the entire industry, and many were hoping and praying for a world title reign. Experienced veterans like Rhino, Big Show, and these men, especially the likes of Benoit, Rhino, Guerrero, were having some exceptional matches. And Raw at the time had just brought back the Intercontinental Championship, so naturally SmackDown followed up with the introduction of the United States Championship. The US title was a strong asset to the SmackDown roster, and initially they saw it that way. Eddie Guerrero, the first champion, went from a somewhat hated heel to a loved babyface in only a month. This man was building some hype already, and by the end of the summer, he was one of the most popular wrestlers and a potential candidate for the WWE Championship. Eddie was in a very profound situation, a situation he had never experienced before, and it all came down to him being himself. Riding with a low rider, showing lots of charisma, he was technically a bad heel because the fans started loving him. And throughout the rest of the year, Latino heat was a huge highlight of SmackDown. I don't think Eddie himself expected it because it just came from out of nowhere. It was a huge draw for the Latino community. They loved him, and to this very day, they still do. That summer turned out to be a special one for him and would drive him to the WWE Championship. The US title was doing well with Eddie, but the moment the Big Show touched it, this man had only one title match. He just had it on his shoulder like a prop and went on about his business like it was a watch. Almost every feud he was in didn't involve the new title. Why? I think The Rock knows why here. But about the Big Show himself, this man was diabolical. It was a comeback year for him though. He was finally booked like a monster and somebody who was feared. Was he a super monster? Hell no. This man still lost a couple of times, but he was in a much better position. It didn't really involve any risky booking decisions like Kane. Kane's 2003 was a very strange one. They started out the year in a tag team with RVD. The team had some comedy moments and was very casual, which was what Kane was in the past few years. His booking was casual, and then they have this bright idea to have him unmask. And if he follows through and it fails, it's on him. But he follows through. Triple H, of course, was the one who did it because why not? And the unmasking itself was strange. And as tough as it was going to be, the way this man was booked was excellent. He wasn't this strong since 1998. He'd throw Eric Bischoff off the stage, burn JR, Tombstone Linda, and the unmasking upgraded his stats from an 86 rated to a 96 rated. He was at times positioned as the main story of Raw, and nobody dared to challenge him except Shane McMahon. This led to a very chaotic and entertaining feud. Shane's balls were electrocuted, he jumped off a stage, although that's a normal day for him, crashed a limo with Kane inside, and to top it all off, faced him in an ambulance match. It was all building up to Kane potentially winning the World Heavyweight Championship from Goldberg, but we don't talk about that here. I find it unfortunate that Kane didn't win the title here, especially because of the strides he made in unmasking. He did that. The story actually succeeded, and instead of winning the title, The Undertaker ends him at WrestleMania 20, and he's never the same. It's tough, but Kane made good on the assignment. It was bound to end with The Undertaker, of course. It's just I think more could have been done. Bill Goldberg's status as a WCW icon had led fans to speculate on a potential WWE return. Goldberg's demands were far too much for WWE to consider, but because the ratings were falling hard, they had to give in and give him a year-long contract worth $1 million. Goldberg was strongly considered for WrestleMania 19 in a match with The Rock, but they decided to bring him in the night after WrestleMania. Great debut, all is well, but this is where the problems would become apparent. Goldberg in WCW was a clear-cut good guy, but he mostly played by his own rules. He was a loner, so seeing him wear Goldust's wig caught a lot of people off guard, and not in a good way. Then to make matters worse, Goldberg had to wrestle in long matches, which clearly exposed him. It was a situation where WWE was like, we're giving you $1 million, so you gotta follow through. The WCW Goldberg wasn't to be found here, not to mention the politics pissed him off. He disliked his place in WWE, and as I said, that $1 million contract put a big red target on him to the point where Linda McMahon called him a failed signing. The WWE style didn't suit him at all. They were asking him to go on a tour in Australia, which he had a right to decline because his contract was different, and he did just that. He said no, which didn't help him at all. He becomes champion, the run is just there, and the fans did see the explosive Goldberg, but at this point, he was checked out. And after losing the title at Armageddon, he threw a fit, leading to a month-long suspension. It wasn't his place. WWE weren't going to invest all this in a man who had a year-long contract, and Goldberg wasn't going to compromise and stay in a place he disliked. So that's what happened here, and the relationship between both sides was strained, and it would take 12 years for them to fix it and have Goldberg return at Survivor Series in 2016. 2003 was a very remarkable year for John Cena. The man had developed a rap character and improved himself all around, whether it's charisma or in-ring. He was slowly winning the fans, especially after he returned in March of 2003. The Doctor of Thuganomics was feuding with the biggest stars on SmackDown, challenging for the title on pay-per-view, and all around being a valuable character on Thursday nights. Cena's status was rapidly rising amongst the ranks of SmackDown, and it got to the point where they had to turn him face. Cena didn't really need a face turn at the time, but it was no doubt about it welcoming. In addition, it was a huge opening with Kurt Angle reverting to being a heel, and The Undertaker going away. Already, he was main eventing SmackDown. His raps were fun, especially the one against Big Show, and WWE knew what they had in their hands. So building up himself in 2003 was going to reward him in 2004. 2003 may have been an all-around noteworthy year for John Cena, but you can't say the same for The Undertaker. The year as a whole was lacking a bit, and this is mostly because of the booking, because in-ring, it's actually The Undertaker's strongest year up to this point, I'd say. He has this forgettable feud with Big Show and A-Train, tried to carry Nathan Jones to a WrestleMania match, but because he was too green, it turned into a handicap match. After WrestleMania, he's feuding with the FBI, and it's a whole lot of nothing. John Cena catches his eye, and it's a feud to help the rookie improve. Good match at Vengeance, but then it's back to A-Train. They finally think, hey, why not put Undertaker in the main event scene? And what follows are some of his very best matches in the year. With Kurt Angle, Brock Lesnar, tag team matches, it doesn't matter. And just when things get going, he's gotta go. And they did it in a huge way by having Kane burying him alive. It was a fitting way for the American Badass to go out by his brother and by being buried alive. I do wonder how his persona would have continued afterwards, but I'm sure WWE did him a favor by bringing back the Dead Man persona. He was always going to be a main eventer, a top guy, but that Dead Man character was meant for him. It just was. Triple H's evolution was used as a tool to bridge the gap between the past, present, and future. The main job of the faction was to ensure Triple H retains the title, but at the same time, it was all about helping Batista and Randy Orton achieve superstar status. In Orton's case, the early parts of 2003 were rocky. He finally returned from an injury and all's going well. The game's by his side, the nature boy, but he quickly disappears because of a foot injury. This man was almost cursed with injuries, but the moment he returns with the mask on, all is forgotten. Randy Orton quickly becomes the legend killer, shows off his charisma, and at 23 years old, this man was the future of WWE, and he was doing a good job of backing that claim. Orton had a huge upside at a young age that was extremely unusual, especially in WWE, and this man played the role of a dastardly heel almost too good. He achieved his biggest accomplishment to close out the year with the Intercontinental Championship and continued his feud with Mick Foley, which led to superstardom. Superstars are worth throwing around often, but there's not many true superstars out there. The Rock is the very definition of a superstar, literally and figuratively. His time in WWE was slowly coming to an end, and everybody knew that he was basically on his way out. The Rock didn't have the most positive reception when the Long Island fans got word of his departure, and after the show concluded, he let them know his true feelings. Off he disappears. Rock's gone in Hollywood for 5 months, and upon his return, he's gone Hollywood. Rock held resentment from the fans disliking him a few months earlier, destroyed Toronto who tried cheering him, and all around you can see how much fun he had. He was enjoying himself a lot, and he ran into another problem. The fans loved him. He'd curse them out, make jokes about their city, but at the end of the day, The Rock was their guy. He was here for a good time, not a long time, and he made good on it. That Act 3 promo at WrestleMania is probably my favorite Rock promo ever. And as I said, 3 months. This guy was around for literally 3 months, yet everyone still talks about this thing to this very day. Upon his comeback in June, he was a face once again, and every attribute he had as Hollywood Rock was still there. It's just he was making fun of heels now. By the end of the year, Rock's Hollywood character was done. He was back to being his regular self and was about to embark on one last run with Mick Foley. I just love Hollywood Rock. You guys know that. Every time we make mention of him on the channel, I always speak good about him because Rock just came in effortlessly and had one last great run. You know, like match-wise, he was wrestling decently. His match with Austin was great, but his character work was on another level. Now, you guys know, I always save the best for last. Brock Lesnar and Kurt Angle's feud. These two men had an incredible 2003, and it's largely due to their feud. Every time Angle and Brock connected, it was world class, even their backstage promos. Whether it's the one where Angle tries to paint a picture of what WrestleMania is all about, or that time where they were messing around, everything was good about it. The story went from intense, Angle robbing Brock of his title shot, and Brock had to bounce back and face him at WrestleMania, to a friendship. At this point, the Olympic hero wants that title, but he's playful and having fun during his pursuit. Brock on the side was breaking the ring with Big Show, and then it was back to intense after the boss got into the Beast's ear. That last arc is probably the best part of the feud. SummerSlam with the roles reversed showed that in this feud, Angle belonged as a face and Brock belonged as a heel. It felt like the proper positioning, and the 60-minute Iron Man match capped off the feud. Many consider it to be the best match in their feud, which is saying something because Iron Man matches are tough to make. Kurt Angle and Brock Lesnar elevated each other's game. Angle had Benoit and Austin, but Brock Lesnar basically forced him to climb up a level. You know, they're bringing the best out of each other. And Brock never really had a skilled opponent like Kurt Angle. They had the comedy, the intensity, and of course, the world-class action. Alright, I'm gonna just talk about some of the best awards here quickly before we end the video. So Tag Team of the Year in my eyes is the world's greatest tag team. I don't think there was a more consistent tag team in WWE at the time. Lost Girls were very entertaining, but Charlie Haas and Shelton Benjamin had it on lockdown throughout the entire year. Most underrated, this is in management's eyes of course, I'd say Rob Van Dam. RVD, I feel like he should have had a bigger year, him and Booker T in particular. Their main focus on Raw, though, was with other guys like Triple H and Goldberg, so they were very affected by it. Women's Wrestler of the Year, Molly Holly. I said this earlier, it's simple. She was the most consistent, she was on point, she had a great Women's Championship reign, and I can't really give it to anybody else. I just can't. TV Match of the Year, Shawn Michaels vs. Triple H, Raw, December of 2003. I was going to give this to the next match, which I consider the match of the year, but we can't have it hogging the awards. HBK once again was at his best here. The Game matched him, which is amazing. It's hard to say that there was a better match on TV, barring a certain match, than this one. As for my match of the year, I just got to give it to Brock Lesnar and Kurt Angle, SmackDown, September 18, 2003. They capped off the feud with something that was all around amazing, and the fact that they did it for 60 minutes really showed the skill level that these guys were on in 2003. Promo of the year, The Rock. You guys know why. I literally explained why. The Rock's the great one. He really showed up here, and every promo of his was so damn entertaining. He was on point. He was world class. Wrestler of the Year. Now, if you watched WWE in 2003, a lot of guys had momentum. A lot of these guys showed up. They had some great performances. Great on the mic at times. But the most consistent to me is Brock Lesnar. Brock Lesnar had the entire year on lockdown. Brock was the guy. They were pushing him hard. He was delivering. Especially once he turned heel. That heel character of his really showed how much Lesnar had evolved. He got better as a promo. His work was more aggressive, more methodical. And the only reason why people don't talk about him much is because this was the time period where he walked away. I think late 2003 Brock Lesnar needs to be appreciated. But yeah, he had a great year. I feel nobody comes close because they just lack that consistency like Brock Lesnar did, so yeah. Alright, WWE 2003 was a strange year. The most stacked roster of all time. Some guys were lost in the shuffle for a bit. And a lot of people will consider a weak year. I'd say it's a transitional year more so. A lot of stuff was very bad. On the other side, you have Kurt Angle and Brock Lesnar having world-class performances. HBK every week was putting on a classic. But one thing for certain is that WWE had their direction at this point. They knew where they were going heading into the next couple of years. So that's what it has over 2002. That said, I don't know, it just wasn't a great year, I'd say, all around. There was some great stuff, but at the same time, they were really screwing up. They were messing up some booking decisions. That's what hurts it. 2004 was the year where Benoit and Guerrero finally got their moments to shine. Edge finally returned. Brock Lesnar and Goldberg left. A bunch of stuff happened, yet at the same time, not much. SmackDown was lacking a lot. They had Kurt Angle as the GM. He couldn't compete. The roster was very thin, and their top babyfaces were Eddie Guerrero and John Cena, and Cena wasn't even a main eventer at this point. As for Raw, I liked it. There was a bunch of stuff that was going on during that year, and right now, let's get into it. Now, in these videos, I tend to cover the worst first. So the worst thing to come out of 2004 was perhaps the whole Kane, Lita, Matt Hardy thing. I will say that to me, it's the worst, but looking back, some of that stuff was just hilarious. First of all, the story starts off terrifyingly. Kane kidnaps Lita and ties her up in the locker room. Then a couple of weeks later, it's revealed that she's pregnant, so we all know what he did to her in that room. And at this point, Matt was finally reunited with her. But then it's revealed to be Kane's baby, and Matt and Kane then fight for Lita in a match at SummerSlam. If Kane wins, then Lita's forced to marry him, but if Matt wins, she's free. It was a very wild storyline, and Kane won the match. The next night, he destroyed Matt Hardy and marries Lita. Over the next couple of weeks, Matt's nowhere to be found as he suffered an injury, and Kane turned face? What? Well, let me explain things. Lita suffered a miscarriage at the hands of some enhancement talent guy. He blasted Kane with a steel chair, and so he began this face turn. He began feeling bad for Lita, I guess. And this guy, the guy that blasted Kane with the chair, his name was Snitsky. Then Snitsky punts a baby doll, Kane feuds with him, and then that evolved into the Edge thing. Overall, a very bizarre storyline that definitely needs to be covered on this channel. It was an uncomfortable, bad storyline. It was, however, funny for the wrong reasons, like Snitsky punting a freaking baby doll. For what reason? I don't even understand. Moving on from Raw, let's discuss the John Cena nightclub story. Unlike the previous storylines, this one actually had potential. The outcome was disappointing, though. So, let me explain things. John Cena at this point, he had just recaptured the US title. He found himself in a bad situation when the debuting Carlito Caribbean Cool challenged him to a title match. He accepted, and by the end of the night, Carlito used Cena's own chain against him to win the title. The next week, we learned John Cena was stabbed at a nightclub, and Carlito denied the allegations made against him, claiming that he doesn't hang out with thugs. But then Theodore Long revealed that Carlito's bodyguard, his new bodyguard, Jesus, was at the club and he's got a shady past. This was done to give Cena time off to film The Marine. Check out this video if you're interested. Now, let me explain things. This story did have some potential to turn out good. Why? Well, New Jack was rumored to be the guy who stabbed John Cena. I don't know if that was true, but this story could have been cool. I do find it weird, though, that WWE is going to hire New Jack knowing what he's done to wrestlers in the past. I'm looking at an old forum post discussing this rumor, and look at those damn comments. Anyways, what we actually got was a nothing. Cena destroyed Jesus at Armageddon, and that was it. Looking back at it, it was nothing more than filler for John Cena up until WrestleMania 21. I mean, was Cena going to lose his first match with a spinner? Hell no! Like I said, this story had some potential, but WWE didn't feel like making it something good. Moving on from this, let me mention that bizarre Undertaker and Paul Heyman story. Following WrestleMania 20, The Undertaker, as the dead man, decided to join Paul Heyman. Why? Well, Heyman threatened to do something to Paul Bearer. Taker had no other choice but to join him and the Dudleys. Now, why did Heyman want Taker? I don't understand. I think it was because he wanted power, I guess. Then the Undertaker had to face the Dudleys at the Great American Bash, and if Taker lost that match, then Paul Bearer is buried inside the plexiglass with cement. The Undertaker managed to save Paul Bearer before he was buried under that cement, but then he decided to pull the lever down and make Paul rest in peace. He said that he had no other choice, and the match itself was so damn boring. I watched it like 6 years ago, and man, I just didn't like it. After this, Taker threatened to destroy Heyman, and eventually this led to Heidenreich debuting. He feuded with Taker for a bit, the matches were in, and overall I still don't get this story. Looking at this, I think it was only a way of getting Heidenreich on the main roster. That's what it looked like to me. Okay, next up, another bad thing that happened in 2004 was Kenzo Suzuki. This guy was a massive disappointment. As with many Japanese wrestlers in WWE, he failed. And this guy, they were initially going to have him debut on Raw and be a Japanese patriot who held anti-American views. His name was going to be Hirohito, but then Suzuki's wife, Hiroko, and a couple of others managed to convince Vince that it wasn't going to be liked in Japan. So that is why he was sent to SmackDown. Now, they were trying to have this story like Japan versus America, and that thing happened in the 40s, yet they were bringing it to wrestling. Like, what the? Also, I believe they were going to have him feud with Chris Benoit, hence Benoit being introduced from Atlanta in 2004. Anyway, Suzuki, I can't name a single good match that he had. There was this Billy Gunn match that was absolutely horrendous, and I heard some say he was a bad wrestler. I will say, though, that there was one match I did like that Suzuki was involved in. It was the matchup against RVD and Rey Mysterio at Armageddon. The only reason why I liked that match was because Van Dam and Mysterio had some awesome chemistry. Also, Rene Dupree was Suzuki's tag team partner, and they actually captured the tag team titles beforehand. Overall, the Kenzo Suzuki experiment failed, and he was only John Cena's punching bag. The funny part in all of this was the fact that WWE had the choice of choosing either Suzuki or freaking Tanahashi to join the company. Instead of choosing Tanahashi, they chose Suzuki. What do you think? Comment down below. Did you know this? I just learned about this while I was making this video. Anyways, moving on from this, let me mention some decent stuff. First up is Eugene. Now, as you all know, Eugene was a mentally handicapped individual who took inspiration from his favorite wrestlers growing up. Now, some, not many, say this was offensive. I personally don't think that was the case. I saw him as a likable babyface, and compared to all the crazy characters WWE did in the past, this isn't even close to any of them. Eugene made the much-hated William Regal a good guy. Those training videos were awesome, and at one point, he was the most over superstar on Raw. They used a very rare Rock appearance in trying to put over Eugene. The coach was the biggest asshole during that segment, and so The Rock came out and put him in his place. It was such an entertaining segment. Then, they put Eugene in a program with Triple H. After the game used Eugene and his plans backfired, the game faced Eugene at SummerSlam. Think about that. Like, Eugene versus Triple H at SummerSlam. Like, that was awesome. Like, Eugene probably didn't expect this to happen. Sure, he lost that match, but he was a notable part of Raw up until his injury in 2005. I don't think anyone expected him to be world champion, but Eugene's booking in his first couple of months was pretty good. I will delve into that in a future video, but like I said, Eugene was, like, inspirational. I liked him. Moving on, let me mention the wretched Diva search. This wasn't decent or anything like that. The WWE had this great idea, this bright idea of bringing in like 20-something women to compete for a WWE contract. This damn thing was doomed from the start. Most of them didn't know much about the business, and it really showed. This bright idea meant those divas were on screen for 20 to 30 minutes. Like, if you're gonna have divas on screen, at least let it be Trish Stratus or even Tori Wilson. Just someone that actually knows something about the business. They took a lot of TV time, and guys like the Hurricane and Steven Richards, like, they wish they were given that much time on Raw. A positive to come from this was the fact that some divas actually were successful, like Michelle McCool, Maria, but on the negative side, they wasted a freaking Rock appearance on a diva search. I can't believe this was Rock's final appearance in 6.5 years. The most memorable segment to come out of this was, well, if you've never watched it before, I suggest you check it out. It was This the Diva, and I heard some stories about this over the years, but I didn't actually watch it until now. Oh my god. They gave them a mic and they could say whatever the hell they wanted. Jerry Lawler was laughing while JR was in shock.
Okay.
Stacy Keibler had this awkward face, and they were saying some words that were never heard on the microphone in WWE, and while making this, I found out a certain story. Rumor has it that Triple H went up to Vince and asked if he could call Randy Orton that since the divas were cussing. That Carmella girl was the most hated woman on the competition. She believed she was entitled to something since she was Playmate of the Year, I guess, and it was a mess, and I believe it was Kevin Dunn's idea. That's what I heard. These ideas tend to look good on paper, but once they execute it, it's bad. Enough talk about the diva search. I'll cover that entire thing in the future. Let's discuss some departures from 2004. Now, as you may know, 2004 was a year of some shocking departures. Goldberg and Lesnar on the same night left the company. Now, I think Goldberg's was expected, but Brock's wasn't. I mean, this guy was the face of WWE. Why would he leave? Well, there's a lot of reasons why Lesnar left. Stress, burnt out. He wasn't pleased with the plans they had for him. And looking back, a 7-year, $10 million contract is funny. Like, Lesnar made $8 million, if the internet's to be believed, in 2018. Anyways, Lesnar went on to sign with the Minnesota Vikings, and he wouldn't play a single game for them. So basically, Lesnar went from being a big deal in WWE to a nobody in the NFL in a few months. But hey, at least he made it to Madden 05. Other departures from WWE were the likes of Kevin Nash, Scott Steiner, Brian Kendrick, Sean O'Hare, Terry Runnels, Rikishi, and to be honest, this one seems shocking. Why? Well, Rikishi, he had been with the company for 10 years at that point, and he was a champion recently. The reason why he was released was because he refused to lose weight. Anyways, other releases included Sable, Jamie Noble, Billy Gunn after 10 years with the company, A-Train, Test, Gail Kim. A bunch of others were released, but the most notable one, up to that point, was Stone Cold Steve Austin. The fact that WWE released him over the smallest thing is disappointing. I mean, it was over his beer company, I guess. They were both in on it, but Austin grew tired of the company controlling this or some other project. I'm not sure which one it was. But Austin, he didn't want them controlling his stuff, and so he left. They left a lot of money on the table, and yes, Austin wasn't an in-ring performer at this point, but he was still the most popular guy on Raw. By the way, this happened in April of 2004. And if you thought this release was shocking, well, you ain't seen nothing yet. On December 31st, 2004, The Rock's WWE contract expired and the company didn't renew it. Rumor has it that they wanted him to crawl back after his film career failed. The Rock was starting to grow in Hollywood, and by the time 2004 rolled around, he only made 5 appearances throughout the year. They decided, you know what, this guy, we want him to come crawling back. We're not going to renew his contract. Now, the funny part in all of this was The Rock was gonna appear at WrestleMania 21. Rumor has he was gonna face JBL. But if he wasn't, he was planning on appearing at WrestleMania 21 and wrestling on the show. But since they released him, he thought otherwise. He was very disappointed in the fact that WWE just, let him go silently. They didn't even mention him, oh, your contract's expiring, by the way. He just noticed, I'm not employed by the company. He was speaking to Meltzer on the Wrestling Observer and stuff like that, and he was let down. Now, WWE's plan, make Rock crawl back, that didn't even work out. He was in a couple of movies from 2005 to 2006, but the movie that actually made Rock a star in Hollywood was The Game Plan. From there, it was over. He was a bona fide superstar in Hollywood. He appeared in Get Smart, Fast and Furious, a bunch of movies, and then WWE actually crawled to Rock for help. We want you to come back for WrestleMania. So yeah, WWE's intentions, they didn't come to life, so this to me is the most bizarre release of 2004. Anyways, moving on, let's mention some of the good stuff from 2004. The Undertaker returning as the Dead Man. Now, this was long overdue. I felt like the American Badass ran its course in 2003, and it was time for the Dead Man to return. That WrestleMania 20 entrance is probably the best Undertaker entrance ever, in my opinion, although WrestleMania 29 and a couple of others give it a run for its money. Now, on the negative, it's a shame that Taker didn't have any viable opponents for his first 4 months. Mordecai was gonna be his opponent, but that turned out to be a dud. As for why we didn't get that match, well, Kevin Thorne got into a bar fight and Vince was worried about some lawsuits. So they dropped the character in the push and they sent him back to OVW. As for The Undertaker, yeah, he couldn't face anyone on the roster without halting their momentum in his first months. Anyways, another good thing to come out of 2004 was Trish Stratus's heel run. Damn! In the beginning, she was just an innocent babyface. She was in a relationship with Chris Jericho, and then she turned on him to side with Christian. From there, she was the biggest bitch on Raw. Seriously, every week she would piss off Lita, and then when she wore the face mask and she main evented Raw with Lita, like, she was so damn annoying, but in a good way. Trish's heel run, yes, it definitely deserves to be covered on this channel. So, yeah, I have plans on making that one. Another great thing to come out of 2004 was Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit's pushes. Before the dark time period, many believed that a new era was dawning. I mean, you had the Rabid Wolverine and Latino Heat as WWE's top champions. Like, that would have been unimaginable only 2 years beforehand. Eddie's title reign should have been longer, but he couldn't cope with the stress of being champion. He saw the ratings falling and a bunch of stuff, and I mostly attribute that to Kurt Angle becoming GM, Brock Lesnar leaving, and a couple of other things. As for Benoit, a good title reign. Sure, he wasn't main event in the shows, but the booking for his title reign was really, really good, and he was a dominant champion. Overall, a very great time in WWE for those two. Now, before I mention some other things, I just want to mention one man who should have been a bigger deal in 2004, and his name is Chris Jericho. After that Christian feud, I felt like Y2J had so much momentum. I don't know why he didn't get a match against Benoit on pay-per-view, because, like, I felt like he was popular, and that would have been a banger. But WWE decided to keep him in the mid-card scene, and, like, I don't know why they did that, but whatever. At least he won the Intercontinental Championship, so yeah. With that said, I gotta deliver some honorable mentions. Molly Holly. The fact that she sacrificed her own hair for a spot at WrestleMania makes her a hero in my book. It was unfortunately, though, the beginning of her downfall in WWE. She wasn't treated as well as she was previously. Next up, the whole Divas dodgeball thing. Like, what was that about? The Divas that have been there for years lost to the damn rookies. They lost to the Diva Search group. Next up is Victoria. She was pretty good during 2004, and I believe she is an underrated performer, and she definitely deserves the credit for making the Raw Divas division entertaining throughout the year. Another thing I want to mention is Triple H and Shawn Michaels' feud. They finally concluded the feud during 2004 inside Hell in a Cell, and you can check out an old video I made about it. Overall, I like that Cell match despite the match length. You could see how desperate they were near the end. Like, they just wanted to hit their finishers and end it. That's how exhausted they were in storyline. Next up is JBL, this guy. From out of nowhere, he captures the title and he proceeds to hold it for 280 days. I thought this was a good run, and if you're interested, check out this video. Another thing that occurred in 2004 was Spike Dudley as the boss. This one was often overlooked. He was out here directing traffic, and he was actually in control of his brothers. It was a fresh start for Spike, and he finally won the Cruiserweight Championship during this run. Another honorable mention was the Billy Kidman and Paul London feud. This one, it's severely forgotten. Kidman accidentally injured Chavo with the shooting star, and he began losing confidence. Eventually, he turned heel and he used the shooting star again, but this time he was looking to inflict damage on his opponent, injuring him. And all in all, a good story, but Kidman did nothing afterwards. I believe he suffered an injury. But hey, at least he had that DMX Light theme song. Next up, John Cena. The Doctor of Thugonomics is 2004 was really good. If you look at him in the beginning of the year and to the end, you could see just how much progress he made. He was the number 2 babyface on SmackDown at times, and it was a really bright spot on the show. His US title run that year really helped him turn into a big star. Oh yeah, I almost forgot, Teddy Long. He started the year off as a manager, but after Kurt Angle got fired as GM, they decided to make him the new general manager. He got comfortable in that role pretty quickly, and I say it was definitely a good thing to occur in 2004. Next up, Eric Bischoff. For some reason, he turned face, which, looking back, was weird, but it was a welcome change, I guess. After Eugene shaved his head, he began to reassess life, at least that's what it looked like, and he became impartial, and he didn't suck up to Evolution anymore. So yeah, it was a fresh start for Bischoff, too. Next up, Edge finally turned heel, and he began his awesome run, and he was a baby, like, why didn't I get my title shot? Where? It was so damn annoying, once again, in a good way. Obviously, it wasn't rated R Edge, but that would come in 2005. And lastly, my MVP for 2004. It might be controversial, but I feel this individual really established himself as a top guy in 2004. Randy Orton. He started the year off trying to call out Mick Foley. He was IC champion and he was coming out to Evolution's music. He managed to change everyone's perception about him at Backlash, and I said in a previous video, but I gotta say it again. Backlash was Randy Orton's coming out party. He wasn't the pretty boy that everyone thought he was. He could get down and dirty. As a matter of fact, he could get dirtier than most in the back. I pinpoint this match as the moment Randy Orton became a star, and from there he gained momentum. He started to build up that Legend Killer character, and he began having better matches and stuff, and then he found the World Heavyweight Championship at SummerSlam. So now he's the youngest champion in history. He beat Chris Benoit clean. That is something that Triple H couldn't do in 2004. I believe he did after Benoit lost the title, but when Benoit was champion, he couldn't beat him at all. Then the game kicked him out of Evolution and took away his title. It was downhill from there, but there were some great moments involving babyface Orton. The cage match against Flair, one of the best matches to last under 10 minutes. Survivor Series 2004 as a whole. And while the babyface run wasn't as successful as they hoped it'd be, Orton's 2004 in general was awesome. Plus, he debuted Burn in My Light, so there's that. Yeah, that's my MVP for 2004. Who's yours? Comment down below. Overall, 2004 was a year of transition, I guess. They had Eddie and Benoit win the titles to give them their moments, while Orton and John Cena began to develop. Brock Lesnar and Goldberg's departures were definitely shocking, as were The Rock and Stone Cold's. And yeah, I'd say this was a transitional year. SmackDown, it was weak as hell. It was so damn thin. Not much happened during the year up until, Big Show returned when he was bald and all that stuff. That was when SmackDown, stuff began to happen on the show. But yeah, overall, Raw was really awesome during this point. That's what I think. That's my opinion. I believe Raw was great. You had Christian and Y2J. You had Edge turning heel. You had Triple H not bearing talent other than Randy Orton. And overall, it was a compelling show. Trish Stratus as a heel is simply amazing. So yeah, WWE in 2004, year of transition in my opinion. I mean, why would they give Benoit and Eddie their moments on this year? So yeah, like I said, my MVP for 2004 is Randy Orton, and my favorite pay-per-view, it's gotta be WrestleMania 20, Backlash, and SummerSlam. After 3 years of rebuilding, WWE was enjoying the fruits of their labor in 2005. It felt like the future was uncertain after 2002, but not only did it turn out well, it was unlike anything the company had imagined before. From the 2002 perspective, it would be Brock Lesnar leading the charge with everyone else behind. And in those 3 years, there was a lot of changes. The likes of Goldberg came in and left the company after a year. The Crash TV style that WWE had tried out in the Attitude Era was left behind in favor of a new era. And best of all, it was the opportunities for the new talent to take. WWE's ratings in 2005 experienced a boost with the pushes of Batista and John Cena, especially Batista's push in the lead up to WrestleMania 21. It felt like a new era was upon us with supporting characters including the likes of Randy Orton, Edge, JBL, Christian, Rey Mysterio, and it was much better than the last 2 years, which was more reliant on Triple H and an endless push that rarely benefited anyone. It would obviously benefit you tremendously if you beat him like Chris Benoit or Batista did though, but one thing that's noticeable about the year is that from the beginning to the end, you knew what you were getting for the most part, in the sense of Batista, Cena, Orton, Edge, and Rey Mysterio being the future, and they never made you doubt that sentiment not one bit. Now you guys know how these year reviews go. Worst to first, some stuff sprinkled in. Just because something's mentioned early on doesn't mean it was bad, but this is where mostly the bad stuff is, so let's get into it. After many years as WWE's leading commentator, Jim Ross through it all experienced some strange dealings inside and outside the ring. The boss just involved him in bizarre things such as the Kiss My Ass Club, made fun of him for his accent and hat, and as 2005 was coming to a close, WWE decided to move on from the lead voice, despite there being no real reason to. JR was still around and his performances didn't decline, but it was time to move on. WWE considered Mike Goldberg of the UFC as the lead commentator for Raw, and it creates an interesting dynamic because anytime you watch a UFC event from the 2000s and early 10s, he commentated all the fights. Now it's one thing to move on from JR, who was also going to have surgery, which was going to leave him sidelined, but they did this horrible storyline where the McMahons went on a power trip and JR was embarrassed on his way out. Even made a mockery out of his surgery. This led to Stone Cold trying to get his job back. The coach was going to face Austin in his first match back at Taboo Tuesday, and the coach was set to win, and this is where Austin backed out because it was stupid. This in turn leads to Joey Styles taking JR's position for 6 months and having a weird style that didn't resonate much. It was a horrible storyline. With regards to Joey Styles, though, it's not the fact that he was a bad commentator, but for what WWE expected, he wasn't that. But this story, it was horrible. One of the worst from the entire year because it was all nonsense. I get they explained wrestlers and characters' absence back then, but this one could have just simply been down to JR leaving to get surgery. It would be the definitive #1 if it wasn't for the next storyline, though. Following WrestleMania 21, Kurt Angle and Booker T were vying for the WWE Championship. Kurt Angle, though, wanted more than gold. He wanted Booker T's wife. He just suddenly translated all that competitive nature he had into getting her by any means. All already this was a crazy-ass storyline because Kurt Angle was the most gifted wrestler on SmackDown, yet they tried to have him do some nonsense like this to make matters worse. This guy was shouting that he wants to have sex with her. Anytime the camera was on him, he was shouting about her. Even said something about bestiality, which isn't a word, but Vince insisted on it, apparently, according to a couple of people, and barged into a room at one point during his match with Booker T. He's beating up Booker T when he randomly just decides, hey, I have a boner, and just randomly runs to the back. He was a proper weirdo at this point, and Angle himself considers it to be his worst storyline in WWE. Only in wrestling where one guy can go from having a match at the year WrestleMania with Shawn Michaels to being a sex offender. I hate this storyline because of everything. Like, there's a lot of weird stories you can do. Why this one? I know. Kurt Angle is a heel. They're trying to get him hated. This is what they were trying to do. Kurt Angle even became racist later on, cursed out the troops, but through all of this, even though he's a sex offender and all of this, they still cheered him. Tim White had enjoyed a career out of being a referee. He was one of the main referees for the WWE throughout his run and was considered a friend by Andre the Giant. He was also his agent. Sometime after Judgment Day 2002, his appearances were limited. They were happening less often after he suffered an injury during the Hell in a Cell match. By 2005, he was working backstage. WWE decided to make his disappearance a storyline. Josh Matthews visited the Friendly Tab barn and his depression was on full display. He even tried to off himself. This led to a series on WWE.com where he would make many attempts to take his life. It was so bad, it's so dumb. Josh Matthews, he's like, that's not wise. Tim, don't do it. Hang in there is what he read from a letter. And the biggest controversy from this was the fact that it happened a month after Eddie Guerrero died. Eddie's death was a huge thing regardless, but unlike Owen Hart's death, he was mentioned every week at the time, so there was a certain feeling in the months following his passing, especially on SmackDown. It all ended with Tim White finding Josh Matthews so annoying that instead of killing himself, he killed him. It was bizarre, and WWE.com in the years of 2005 and 2006 was filled with strange shows. It was hated and criticized due to the fact that Eddie Guerrero died and all that, but it's under the radar because it was a WWE.com show, so yeah. The mid-2000s was filled with big guys making their debut on SmackDown and having a unique finisher. For good and for bad, the guys that were green most likely had a finisher that would stand out, but on the other side, the wrestler would have a strange gimmick. Matt Morgan was a name on WWE's radar for quite some time. He was under the company and a member of the OVW roster throughout the years. He even had a run on SmackDown, but WWE thought he was too green and sent him back. Once he came up, he had a stuttering gimmick. Why? I don't know. So they could take him as a joke and a threat at the same time. They weren't helping their wrestlers, and Morgan ended up disappearing again after a couple of months. He'd be like this, I don't have a stuttering problem. And then he'd destroy some random ass jobber. He did well for himself in TNA as a blueprint, but WWE didn't seem to wait it out. They wanted him in the future, but it never happened. The mid-card in general had a lot of strange and weird gimmicks and storylines. The dicks coming out and spraying each other with water before getting pounded. The Mexicals were made as a joke. Juan Dero was the name of their lawnmower, and as a kid, anytime I saw a lawnmower, I just think about the Mexicals. Regardless of their gimmick, it was a nice trio of super crazy Juventud Guerrero and Psychosis. Unfortunately, Juventud made himself an enemy, and what was once a trio brought in to rejuvenate the Cruiserweight division was now just around as a duo, as the Juice was released for disobeying orders and hitting a 450 splash during his match with Kid Cash. At this point, he was basically on his way out because he had a lot of heat, didn't really like the fact that they were paired and were stereotyped. Also, the fact that a lot of wrestlers didn't appreciate the fact that the Mexicals had a good push and he was complaining a lot. I really think WWE messed up from the beginning with the Mexicals. We remember them, but we don't remember their performances, and that's because they never really got to show it. So they brought them in for no real reason. This was three talented wrestlers, three of the best high-flying wrestlers of the 90s and 2000s, so it's unfortunate to see that they never actually did much. The juniors division was trash and was a joke from beginning. Kerwin White is another thing to mention. Chavo Guerrero had grown tired of his Latino heritage and just decides to forego it to become white. He's in the suburbs, rides a caddy to the ring, and you know the saying, if it ain't white, then it ain't right. I actually scrapped the video about him because I ran into a well while making it, but Chavo was up for the character even though it wasn't his choice. I do wonder what would have been of him if Eddie never passed. He actually did a good job with the role and acted delusional thinking he was actually white. His entrance theme song, I listened to it and it's just so damn good. I don't know why. It shouldn't hit as hard as it does. I gaze upon my picket fence or whatever the hell it is. It's a funny gimmick. It's an ironic gimmick as well. I think it was inspired by Dave Chappelle's KKK skit, but he did a great job with it. It's kind of stupid, but he did a great job with it. Boogeyman finally made his way to the main roster, and it was an entirely bizarre gimmick that easily stood out. He really played the role well, and I can't really imagine anyone else as the Boogeyman. Bobby Lashley debuted on SmackDown and didn't have a gimmick. He just destroyed some random jobbers and leave. Jillian Hall, JBL's image consultant, had something on her face, and everyone would just stare at her. It was basically a mole. And there's plenty of more gimmicks that we'll mention throughout this video as well, but these are some of the lower card guys. WWE's Cruiserweight division didn't really have a strong hold on the SmackDown brand as it once did. Rey Mysterio went up to the upper mid-card and was about to enter the main event scene. He had surpassed the division. This left the Cruiserweight division to be a forgotten part of the show. There were still good matches between the likes of Akio and Paul London, any combo of London and Billy Kidman, but the focus wasn't on the division, at least how it was before, and they suffered. It was easy to pair these guys and have some good matches because the entire division was talented, and there was even plans for a respected reboot for the division with the likes of the Mexicals, Kid Cash, and even Frankie Kazarian, but John Laurinaitis sabotaged it, and this led to the juniors division. It was so
simple, but they made things hard for themselves. Cruiserweight division was just guys going out there wrestling, doing high-flying moves, but the wrestlers themselves were somewhat limited because they can't bust out some crazy moves. Even then, they still put in good performances, and on top of that, WWE didn't really care. WWE's tag team division experienced many things throughout the year. On Raw, the tag team championships meant nothing. La Resistance, Hurricane and Rosie, and Lance Cade and Trevor Murdoch held the belts, and I can't tell you a single thing about their title reigns, because those runs were nothing. It almost felt like they used the tag team division as a part of a checklist or something. I think they were better off not even having a tag team title on Raw, because none of those matches stood out or had anything notable about them until Kane and the Big Show teamed up. They instantly made the titles important just by having them on their shoulders. Plus, they were featured a lot towards the end of the year with the SmackDown vs. Raw feud. It's better than having the titles only be featured on Heat. SmackDown, on the other hand, had a much better idea about what to do with the titles. Ray and Eddie Guerrero held them at one point, but the real highlight throughout the year was Eminem. There wasn't much competition for Tag Team of the Year and WWE for them, but they had great performances, were entertaining heels, and had a funny gimmick. Melina's presence brought a lot to the duo. She carried herself like a huge A-list star, and Eminem shined. They had some decent matches throughout the year, with the notable one being their Iron Man match against Charlie Haas and Hardcore Holly. It's just the pairings weren't that interesting, so whenever they'd face a team, it would be a nothing match. LOD was remade with Heidenreich taking Animal's place in the group. It wasn't going to be good. Plus, Heidenreich actually had issues with Animal at the time, and they even had a fight backstage at one point. Eminem was the best team that year was by far. No one was close at all, nor did they put up much of a fight to take that spot. Raw's women's division had a huge change throughout the year of 2004. A lot of releases and different pushes that seemed to stifle the division a lot. Molly Holly wasn't pushed as much as she once was, and even left WWE after WrestleMania 21. Victoria was out with an injury. Lita as well, who ended up returning but as a manager to Edge. And 2005 was carried by Trish Stratus, a woman who was sidelined for 5 months, and even then they didn't strip her of the title because nobody was a potential suitor to the belt. There was the option of trying to push someone, but WWE would laugh in your face for mentioning that. This is where somebody like Gail Kim or Jazz would have succeeded, but WWE released them in November of 2004. There was no real face of the women's division in the summer of Trish away. The Diva Search was the main story, and that competition was horrible. It wasn't as terrible as 2004's. That was an absolute train wreck we'd personally avoid. Here, Ashley Massaro won the competition and ended up having one of those rookie storylines leading to the return of Trish Stratus. She returned as a face as opposed to her heel run previously. I'd guess because there would be nobody that could dethrone her, maybe that's why, but she was clearly the best women's wrestler on Raw. Her heel character was great and had a certain bitchiness to her that was perfect. It's just that run never had a proper ending to it. It was the best decision here to have her come back as a face. It was a more seasoned version of Trish Stratus, who was about to enter her final run. This trio were not much of a threat as they tried to make them seem at times, but the division would have some much needed talent with the debut of Mickie James. Mickie James ended up being the face of the women's division over the next few years as well. 2006 was much better in that regard because of the fact that while it was once again mostly Trish and Lita, they actually had some stories in there such as the Mickie James one. Kane's unmasking in 2003 led to him becoming unhinged and as most dangerous. It had been a long time since Kane was seen as such a huge threat. This would take a hit after WrestleMania 20 after he lost to The Undertaker, but he was still out there. They even had a storyline where he went after Lita, and she ended up carrying his baby. I actually can't believe I said that. It was against her will as well. That's the storyline. Matt Hardy's relationship with Lita was once again on TV, and somehow, someway, this all transitioned into a storyline involving Edge. Edge in real life grew a little too close to Lita on the road as Matt Hardy was sidelined. This resulted in plenty of drama from Hardy, who ended up being released. He complained about it, made a big fuss about it, of course, and they released him. This also made him very popular with the fans, and WWE had no choice but to respond to the crowds who hijacked Lita's segments. It was also with Edge's segments as well, so they decided to turn Lita heel and make them an on-screen couple. Edge had a lot of heat at the time. This only added fuel to the fire as he was basically playing his real self, but in a heel way. Hardy was supposed to make appearances with ROH, but WWE ended up bringing him back just to cuck him out of this feud and give Edge the upper hand. I never got this storyline because WWE fumbled it. It was supposed to be simple, but I guess the moment they gave Hardy a microphone and bombed in his first promo, they had other plans. I'd say it's mostly because Edge was their guy. Edge was always backed from day one, and this wasn't going to change anything, especially because he was Money in the Bank. So Matt Hardy was paid to help Edge, and that was it. He ended up going to SmackDown and had heat, which again, if you were a wrestler in the 2000s and your name wasn't JBL, The Undertaker, and Triple H, you were going to have it. He had heat because he ran away from a tombstone at Survivor Series from The Undertaker. That's the story that everyone thought, but Hardy corrected it and said it's because he no-sold to The Undertaker's appearance. He wasn't supposed to take the tombstone. He was casual after the event, but then JBL, and I don't know how in the hell he noticed. How did JBL notice? He noticed Hardy feeling like he's above everyone, which was clearly not the case. He made a mistake, obviously, and no-selling Undertaker's return. JBL snitched, which led to Taker confronting Hardy and forced an apology out of him. He got punished for 2 months until he got his ass beat beat at Armageddon by JBL, got humped or violated by Viscera, got his ass beat by Eminem. And it's funny how things ended up for him because it really felt like Hardy had all the momentum upon his return, but they weren't gonna push him. He was back because they felt like they wronged him by firing him, and he was just back to put over Edge. It was simple as that. Brock Lesnar's departure from WWE in 2004 was a rough one. He basically turned his back on them. There was a lot of bitterness from the company and some of the wrestlers, such as the Big Show. When I say turned his back, I'm talking from their perspective, because regardless of Brock's push, it was always his decision to make, and if he felt that way, he should do as he saw fit. Lesnar learned that the no-compete clause that WWE had in his contract really made things tough for him. He always considered a run in New Japan Pro Wrestling, which would have suited him well, and there was plenty of rumors that Brock would return to WWE, but it was going to be awkward, especially for his ego. It's never a good thing to crawl back. Brock was set to potentially return on the SmackDown brand as an opponent for Batista. He was getting paid less than he was previously, but it was still a lot. There was a meeting at the headquarters, and it seemed things went well, but it died down, and Brock didn't like their deal. So he went against the contract and went to New Japan. Brock's return would have changed the dynamics of the entire company. I do think almost everyone that won a title later on, such as Orton and Edge, would have, but I do wonder what would have happened to someone like Rey Mysterio. Plus, Brock was the final piece of the puzzle for UFC's boom period at the time. It was already going well, but I do wonder how different things would have been in the octagon. Brock felt very upset with the way Vince talked to him and said that nobody has talked to him like that in his life. He chewed him out, he yelled at him on, did all kinds of things, and Brock was at a loss for words. Muhammad Hassan's debut in the WWE came with a lot of realism and controversy. It was a post 9/11 world, and even though it was 3 years earlier, it still felt like America was in that chapter of the decade. Hassan's introduction easily stood out and crossed barriers, a Muslim living in constant paranoia. It started off pretty simple, but also forced WWE to go in a more realistic direction and acknowledge the Iraq war and have Hassan show more and more hostility towards the Americans. It was gradual, and while he did have some valid reasons, he would basically undo it himself by his actions. That Royal Rumble moment where they jumped them two brands that hate each other, SmackDown and Raw United, to throw him out of the Rumble was crazy. As expected, this man had heat in the back because of his push, and also because he got goaded into telling Eddie Guerrero to stop using the camel clutch, a move his father created. Other than that, his push was getting more and more momentum. He was green, but that character and everything around it was basically gonna push him to the very top. That would all come crashing down after Hassan was implied to be a terrorist by WWE. The episode of SmackDown was taped 2 days before the London bombing, and once UPN aired the episode on Thursday, he was done. He was banned from SmackDown and even then cut up tremendous promo on WWE.com. They considered repackaging him, but it was going to be a long time before he'd actually return. That never happened, and he was released. I wonder how different things would have been for Hassan, because he played that role perfectly. I always thought he was an Arab and a Muslim for years. This guy's Italian. I don't think it was ever going to end well, because that type of character needed a certain aversion from controversy, and WWE isn't known for that. Hassan's departure from the WWE wasn't the only one that year. WWE cleaned house once again. Luther Reigns, a protege of Kurt Angle and storyline, asked for his release after creative constantly changed plans and turned down his idea of being Christian's second problem solver with Tyson Tomko. Other than that, the mid-card was cleared. A lot of names from the 2002 to 2004 era were released, and the most surprising release from this bunch was the Dudley Boys, one of the greatest tag teams of all time. It seemed like they were released, but it came down to the duo not coming to terms with WWE on a new contract. They were off TV for about 7 months and were down in OVW. SmackDown could have used the Dudley Boys in a feud with Eminem. The division was just so boring and lacked names and any importance. Other than that, there was a couple of WWE departures, but those were more on their own terms, which we'll get to later. The mid-card titles were in a way better position than the tag titles. The matches actually delivered more and had more interest. John Cena was US champion in the beginning of the year, but had outgrown the title and was ready to move up to the top. Orlando Jordan took the title from someone that mattered and did nothing. It contradicts what I said, but just wait. Jordan's run was just him hanging out with JBL and doing nothing. I can't remember a title match of his that lasted for more than 20 seconds. Chris Benoit's champion though was different. We don't talk about him as one of the best US champions for a reason, but from this era of WWE, there was nobody that was a better champion than him. He brought more legitimacy to the US championship, and because he was such a respected name, the title had more attention to it. Booker T challenged for that title and even turned heel to win it with the help of his wife Charmel. They tried to do the best of 7 series like they did in WCW, and it didn't work the same, but the matches weren't bad. They needed a little more to them. It was just not the right time to do the best of 7 series. It was much better in WCW. On Raw, Shelton Benjamin had one of the more memorable Intercontinental Championship reigns from that era of WWE. Shelton had incredible athleticism and a certain hunger about him in 2005 that was special. I think it's because he actually felt that he could go to the very top. The commentary was saying it, everyone was talking good about him, and he himself had the performances to back it up. Who was the best part of Money in the Bank at WrestleMania? This guy. This guy was a human highlight reel and was like nobody else on the roster. Shelton's performance though against Shawn Michaels was his very best, and to this day it's probably the best match he ever had. HBK as a surprise entrant in the Gold Rush tournament faced a young upstart with all the hunger in the world and a performance that pushed Shawn Michaels to his very limit. One of the best Raw matches of all time, and to some of you it was just that. Simple story with Shelton thinking he has it all figured out. It worked for the most part and got him to this very point, but HBK had a few tricks up his sleeve and utilized his experience to the maximum. Something that as good as Shelton was, didn't really have. Unfortunately, the moment Carlito won the title in his Raw debut, his push took a turn and this man had heat. Every time I go back to this era, we hear about someone that has heat. WWE didn't really care much about him, and he was left off all the pay-per-views for the most part until he turned heel. He still got that mid-card push later on, but there was something special with this version of him. Carlito, on the other hand, was in a very great position at this point. Not only was he the Intercontinental Champion, but this man had his own talk show on Raw. Why did Carlito shine? Not only was he a good wrestler he could put in the performances, but also had a no pun intended cool character. It seemed like the sky was the limit for him at the time. Chris Masters was pushed somewhat similarly in the sense of someone who was seen as a rising star. He was pretty good though, but had a very impressive physique and presentation. I really like the Masterpiece gimmick. It makes him seem much bigger than he's supposed to be. He got in a big feud with HBK after SummerSlam, and it was a standout match. HBK really knew how to pull the strings on this one, and Masters managed to earn the trust of Michaels with this performance. He got really better later on in his second run, but he didn't have the same feeling and presentation as he did in 2005. If Masters had the ability of his 2010 self, he would have done much better during this time period. There's always going to be politics to deal with, of course, but he'd have a better chance. Chris Jericho had enjoyed a successful run in WWE. Over the last 6 years, Jericho exemplified a world-class ability in the ring and outside, which allowed for him to get to the point he did. Y2J had a uniqueness about him, but despite all of this, he never touched the World Championship since WrestleMania 18. It was never on Jericho's ability, rather the pecking order, and he fell victim to that. I think Jericho was most deserving of the title during his face run in 2004. Great heel work as well in 2003, but you guys know how it was. By 2005, he was burnt out and felt like he needed a change of scenery away from the squared circle. He had one last heel run and put over John Cena before leaving. Raw didn't take a hit with Jericho leaving, nor did the entire company feel hurt at all. It was the best time for him to leave because I can't imagine much after a great heel run. He felt almost above the Intercontinental Championship at the time, already feuded with John Cena, Triple H, Ric Flair, Shawn Michaels, and that's practically the entire main event scene on Raw. The dynamics weren't really going to be different as they were later on in 2008 and 2009. You know, then he changed his character a lot, and there was a lot that was different with Chris Jericho as opposed to here. Christian, on the other hand, had a different situation. Heading into 2005, Christian had perfected his new heel character called Captain Charisma. Christian already had the performances in the ring, but almost lacked the seriousness about him. He could get serious and all that, but his best work as a single star mostly involved comedy. That partnership with Trish Stratus helped a lot and gave him more legitimacy. After WrestleMania, it would begin to show more. Crowds were interested in him, and Christian had a much better relationship with the crowd than WWE expected. He had a great reaction from the crowd in MSG, and that wasn't even the best one. Raw was in Calgary at one point, and he wasn't even wrestling. He just showed up for a segment and had one of the best reactions of the night. Things were going well for him, and Christian even had a short feud with John Cena at one point. They transitioned that into the Y2J storyline, which didn't need to be that. Christian already had storyline problems with John Cena dating back to the Royal Rumble. Then he moved to SmackDown, and his push went nowhere. I get they want to push John Cena, who just won the title, but the SmackDown thing was weird because there was no real reason to keep Christian away from prominent positions. Batista could have feuded with him at some point as well, and he wasn't really around as he once was. Christian didn't feel important. He saw how things were and didn't renew his contract when it expired in October of 2005. Christian didn't really have anything bad to say and quickly signed with TNA, who pushed him as a babyface. It was his year. I think in some ways Christian could have done a little more here. Obviously, I don't expect him to beat John Cena for the title, but I do think it should have been one-on-one because they had more of a story than Chris Jericho did. Jericho was most likely going to feud with them anyways, but for vengeance, I think it would have been best if it was Christian versus John Cena. 2005 seemed very bright for Randy Orton. At face value, he was a man to face Triple H for the title at WrestleMania. They already had the story down, and Orton even beat Triple H at Survivor Series in an elimination match. Somewhere along the way, the Randy Orton they imagined wasn't there. It was a guy trying to play a role that he wasn't suited for. A part of it comes from the fact that Orton wasn't as cool as he was as a heel, and fans noticed that. He was doing decent in the early parts of his face turn, but didn't ramp it up as time went on, and there was a much better and believable option in Batista. So he had to go back to what he knew best, the heel role. This came at a great time as he was set to feud with The Undertaker. Orton brought out that mean streak back and delivered a good match with The Undertaker at WrestleMania. Orton was going to continue the story but came down with a shoulder injury. It was not the best time, but it also allowed for him to return fresh on the SmackDown brand to continue the feud. This feud brought out the best in The Undertaker as well, who was about to start that best pure striker era. He needed the best opponents, and WWE took notice. What followed was the best version on The Undertaker. The Undertaker needed this, and it improved his legacy. I think as good as he was before in the character he brought to the company, I think a lot would have been different if the best pure striker Undertaker wasn't around. He had a great feud which centered around Orton's obsession of getting rid of The Undertaker, even burning a casket containing him. While Orton was doing all this with his father by his side, it was paced well and culminated with a Hell in a Cell match. Good cell match to end the feud with The Undertaker on top. Randy Orton's 2005 was a very important one. It put him back on track and allowed him to be what he knew best, a heel. As for The Undertaker, he reimagined him and set up a nice couple of years for the dead man. Shawn Michaels' 2005 was certainly a notable one for him. He had a great year with plenty of memorable matches and stories. What makes 2005 unique though was the fact that he turned heel. HBK didn't really take the role of a villain since his return in 2002. There was that NWO thing, but nobody really cares. With the Hulk Hogan feud, he got to show what he was capable of. Michaels didn't need to bring all that controversy in his past to be a great heel. All he had to do was inflate his ego, and that was enough to make him an amazing heel for the summer. HBK made a mockery out of Hogan inside and outside the ring. The promo in Montreal was ridiculous and highlighted that they'll probably never like him there. It was short-lived because WWE didn't really want to continue there, but people still talk about it to this very day. day. Shawn Michaels was back to being a face the next night like nothing happened and feuded with Chris Masters. The Hogan story probably needed one more match, but he managed to politic his way into avoiding a rematch, which would have saw Shawn Michaels most likely scoring the win. Triple H's year in 2005 was a weird one. He wasn't around the title scene after returning in October, and even though he was basically destroying Ric Flair on a weekly basis, he felt more relaxed compared to previous years. That feud was very good, but Triple H felt cooler than previous years. John Cena's push even got the fans to start rooting for him over the babyface, and this was a man that was considered to be someone that terrorized the main event scene for 3 years. I think the common difference between this version of Triple H and the previous one is that because he wasn't in the title scene all the time and was delivering on his performances, it made him look better. And that feud with Ric Flair was great. I really love the storyline, the fact that Ric Flair never won the IC title, overcomes Carlito, but even then Triple H felt that it was a disgrace to see his old friend, his idol, one of the guys he used to look up to as a kid, turn into such a joke. Great story. Rey Mysterio finally managed to move away from the Cruiserweight division after 2 years. Rey was clearly much higher than the division and had potential to go to the very top. His first feud was with his good friend Eddie Guerrero. Best friends are meant to be bitter rivals at their core. Eddie won the tag team titles with Rey, but felt some bitterness over the WrestleMania match, which saw Rey constantly adjust his mask and beat Eddie Guerrero. It had the elements of their WCW feud in the action part, but WWE brought more of a personal vibe with this one, and that intensified with each match that Rey won. So Eddie revealed that Rey's son Dominic wasn't actually his son. His father is Eddie. And it's funny to think that the storyline had a soap opera aspect to it, because these guys are mostly pro wrestling through and through. Well, that's what makes it memorable. I always think storylines that are bad with good matches is a strange combination. It's usually the opposite. Eddie was a good heel here. He felt very cold and vicious initially, but noticed that it accomplished nothing, because at the end of the day, at its core, it's not about destroying Rey Mysterio, it's about beating him in a wrestling match. So he tried to use other mind games, but even that didn't work. All Eddie had to do to win the match was wrestle, and that's what he learned by the end of the feud inside the steel cage. Rey Mysterio certainly increased his stock with this storyline, but Eddie in particular showed a little more than he did previously. He wasn't the same in-ring a bit. He took a hit because of that rough 2004, but he got better as a promo, and as a sleazy heel that had all kinds of ways to get to his opponent, whether it's by lying, cheating, or stealing, or psychologically destroying his opponent, or even dishing out a brutal beating. That was what was different about Eddie Guerrero here. While Kurt Angle had his share of strange stories throughout the years, such as becoming a hater of America and signing with Daivari, Angle's expected shine the brightest when it came to the matches. His match with Shawn Michaels was a dream match that fulfilled the expectations set by the fans. They had a great story centered around being the best. HBK refused to be outshined, not to mention refused to be used like a doormat, whereas Angle had plenty of respect for him, but he felt that he doesn't deserve to be called the best, because in his time away, Angle became just that. WWE saved this one for a while, but when it happened, it was incredible and still holds up well. It had everything you want in a classic match between Angle and Michaels. The WrestleMania setting, the story, and of course the action. I personally think it's the greatest WrestleMania match of all time and one of WWE's very best matches ever. It's pro wrestling at its finest. Their sequel is very strong, and while it does give the WrestleMania match some competition, it didn't top it. Still one of WWE's best matches of 2005 though. Their finale came at WWE Homecoming with a 30-minute Iron Man match. Both men had one win each, and this was supposed to be the tiebreaker. That wasn't to be though, as it ended in a draw, leaving things open. Michaels did win the feud, but it lacked a true finale, as their last match happened on Raw in January 2006. I think because these two guys were as good as they were, I low-key wish the finale happened again at WrestleMania 22. It almost felt like that was the direction before Batista's injury. Another thing to mention is that their matches mostly happened before Angle became the wrestling machine. Angle himself wished that it came down to him and HBK in Chicago. Brand supremacy has been a common theme in WWE stories throughout 2002 to 2005. It was never as intense though as it was in 2005. SmackDown and Raw had too many problems, starting with Eric Bischoff's offense to SmackDown having a slot on his Raw show for a match. It developed to become the biggest rivalry in WWE and had to end with a big Survivor Series match. I really liked this version of SmackDown vs. Raw because it had been building for months. Wrestlers were invading shows and embarrassing said brand, and the match ended up delivering with Shawn Michaels, Batista, JBL, Rey Mysterio clashing. And yeah, it could have been better if it was Batista, JBL, Orton, Rey, and Lashley against John Cena, Kurt Angle, Triple H, Edge, and Shawn Michaels. That would have been insane, but still, it was a great match that gave a proper ending to the storyline and the return of The Undertaker after the match. Unfortunately, tragedy struck the wrestling world on November 13, 2005. Eddie Guerrero shockingly passed away. Eddie's passing stunned everyone. He was a loved figure in the world of wrestling and a personable example of somebody who overcame the odds. It was his time though, and Guerrero's career and life were incomplete. He still had a lot more to accomplish inside and outside the ring. Eddie had just came off a feud with Batista that centered around friendship, and there's something about the fact that Eddie passed away during a time where he reverted to his most prominent character. His last match was a representation of his character. Eddie Guerrero left his wife Vicky and 2 young daughters at the age of 38. His death hovered over the WWE for the next few months. Tributes from fans were pouring from all over the world, and we all lost a legend. For as much that Eddie achieved, his most important achievement in wrestling was the comeback in 2002. He went through it all, and even then, he still managed to become the WWE champion. Rey Mysterio and Chavo Guerrero did a strong job of carrying his name over the next few months, and Eddie Guerrero is still missed to this day, and his death still affects many. Eddie Guerrero, one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. 2005 was at the end of it the year of John Cena and Batista. These two are who WWE invested in the most and put over above and beyond. With John Cena, his potential was becoming clearer and clearer as 2004 came to a close. He managed to convince them by the end of the year. Cena's only real weakness was his in-ring skills, but he had improved a lot and became undeniable. There was nobody more likely to take the title off of JBL. As 2005 rolled around, his star power only increased and provided a huge opening for WWE to make a star. It wasn't a hot shot like Owens, it was more calculated, and it got to the point where fans were asking for it. Cena rose to the occasion and was crowned champion at WrestleMania 21. JBL did a tremendous job playing his foil and giving Cena a boost to the top as the rich villain from the streets of New York City. JBL's contributions to Cena's push were huge. They had a great I Quit match at Judgment Day 2005, which was one of Cena's most important performances, and outside the ring, Cena's popularity was increasing, and it got to the point where he released a rap album. It had been a while since WWE saw new stars emerge with so much ferocity like John Cena and Batista did. With the champ, though, WWE invested a little more in him, moving Cena to Monday nights where his push took a turn. John Cena's fan reception throughout the first half of 2005 was mostly positive. I wouldn't even say mostly, but almost entirely positive. The move to Raw put him under a microscope, though, and WWE took away some characteristics Cena had beforehand. There was also a stronger push that resulted in fans realizing that not only was John Cena watered down a bit, but he was portrayed as an underdog despite being the dominant champion. Those first two feuds with Jericho and Angle really changed a lot of the fans' perception of John Cena. Performance-wise, he didn't have the same level as he did only a year later, so he needed to be guided more in the ring, as opposed to how he usually commands these days. The hate for Cena would increase as time went on, but 2005 was the beginning. It was still a great year for him in the beginning of his dominant run on top. Personally speaking, I prefer 2006 Cena over 05. He felt more comfortable on top, and the performances showed more so. Here, his feud with Kurt Angle wasn't as good as it was in 2003. The matches weren't on the level of their SmackDown matches, and his best match was Taboo Tuesday 2005, and that in itself was a match where HBK and Kurt Angle did most of the work. Still a great year for him, but the booking wasn't the best. And when I mean booking, I mean the way they portrayed John Cena after he moved to Raw. I do wonder how different things would have been if he stayed on SmackDown, though. Other than that, he was always going to hold the title for a long time, but number one, they made him seem like an underdog, and number two, fans in general don't really like dominant champions on top. As time goes on, it's more and more likely that fans turn on him because he's booked a certain way. As for Batista, I said it before, but I thought his title reign was slightly better. Throughout 2004, everyone believed Randy Orton would take the spot in the WrestleMania main event against Triple H. He won the belt before and had a story with the game. Orton didn't rise to the occasion as a face, and instead it was the Animal. Batista was a perfect choice and had a lot of fan support. Even when they teased the split after Survivor Series, the fans went insane. Randy Orton never got a reaction like that as a face. Similar to JBL, Triple H's role as the final boss on Raw only made Batista's push look even better, especially because they had a connection and evolution. One of the best builds WWE had for a WrestleMania match. It was the hottest a wrestler was in about 4 years, and again, Triple H had a long run on top, but when it came to Batista, he did an amazing job of establishing him as the number one guy. He lost 3 matches in a row to him, with the last one being inside Hell in a Cell. It can't get better than that, and that Hell in a Cell match just might be top 5 for me. They didn't need to leave the cell and do some crazy spots. It was just two men trying to destroy each other. There's something special about Batista coming off of his 3 matches with Triple H. He felt like he was 99 overall. His move to SmackDown didn't result in the fans turning on him like John Cena because his booking was slightly different. Batista was never portrayed as an underdog, just that dominant champion was cool, and the Batista you saw throughout 2005 was the same one at the end of it as opposed to Cena. The champ drew more though, and that's what mattered most to WWE. Personally speaking, I like Batista's reign more. They were pushing him hard, but not to the point where fans started turning on him. That's what gives him the edge, plus he had more violent matches, comedy stuff with Eddie Guerrero, and even a tag team run with Rey Mysterio. There's more to offer here. Cena's 06 was much better. He had a charm on SmackDown that wasn't used to the maximum on Raw. There was some segments such as the one he called out everyone on the roster, or the time he's just walking around in the locker room. Those were 2 of my favorite segments of his throughout the year. Alright, some bonus stuff we gotta mention throughout 2005. Rhino got fired after WrestleMania for an argument with his wife. They did bring him back for ECW One Night Stand, but he was gone afterwards. It's a very unfortunate release for Rhino. It was a slight mistake, and he paid the price for it. They showed no mercy. Viscera had a bizarre-ass gimmick. I don't even know what the hell was up with this whole ladies' man thing. They would continue to develop it as the year went on, and it got even weirder. Raw moved to USA Network, and SmackDown also moved to Friday nights in September. WWE changed the set design as well. This set is very nostalgic to me. It reminds me a lot of SCR 07, as well as that time period itself. Whenever I see the set, it brings a lot of good memories. Eric Bischoff's run as Raw GM came to a close at the end of the year. They finally ended things and moved on, and it was just a way of changing things, you know? Like, it's not like Eric Bischoff had any heat or problems. They just wanted to move things on, and they did a storyline with it. Pay-per-view of the year. This one is simple. It just might be ECW One Night Stand. I didn't talk about it much here, but that was a tremendous event. One of the very best pay-per-views of all time. But if you insist, if you want me to choose a WWE event, I'm probably going to choose Vengeance 2005. I'm going to go with Vengeance 2005 over WrestleMania 21. I think all the big matches delivered. They all showed up when it mattered most. Everything delivered. The Hell in a Cell match was one of the best ever as well. Easily pay-per-view of the year for me. Match of the year. This one, you guys already know. Shawn Michaels versus Kurt Angle, WrestleMania 21. It doesn't get any better than Angle and Michaels on the biggest stage of them all. We already talked about it in great detail during this video, but hey, I just want to mention it as the match of the year. Woman of the year, easily Trish Stratus. I already explained it. Easy. There's no doubt about it that it's Trish Stratus. If we choose anybody else, we're lying. And of course, there's one more award, Wrestler of the Year. Now, if you guys watched the video, you guys know exactly who I'm choosing. If Kurt Angle had a more consistent year in storylines, I probably would have chosen him. I'm not gonna lie, I probably would have chosen Kurt Angle for this one, but we're not gonna choose him. We're actually gonna choose Batista. I choose Batista over John Cena simply due to the fact that his first half of the year was on fire. There was a certain fire that Batista had throughout the first half of the year that nobody really matched. I don't know, I think it's because of the Triple H thing, the whole slow burn, everything about it was special, and he's my pick. I choose Batista for 2005, he's Wrestler of the Year. So there it is, WWE 2005. This year was a year of change for WWE, resulted in a lot of stars being made. I of course didn't mention everything here, but we got the basics down, we got a lot of it down. Personally speaking, I thought it was a good year for WWE. They changed things, they opened things up, and it was much fresher than usual. Yeah, they had their problems, yeah, some storylines sucked, yeah, some under-delivered, but for the most part it was good, you know, it was a good year. A lot was different here. It felt like the future was now. That was what it was. So yeah. Alright, what'd you guys think of WWE in 2005? Please comment down below. And that's it for this video. Make sure you hit the angle, slam on the like button, and perhaps the Batista button, and the subscribe button. Peace. I'm out.